Today, we are going to look at the most horrifying moments in live TV history, from New Year's celebrations that ended in concrete coffins to traffic reports that turned reporters into victims of runaway death machines. It was December 31st, 2017, in Ilocos Sur, Philippines, near the old plaza where fireworks were set off every New Year's Eve. The streets followed a familiar rhythm of road closures, vendor stalls, and rehearsed countdowns. Around the square, aging houses with wooden balconies and concrete add-ons stood quietly above groups waiting for midnight. Paulo Rivera was 34, a sales coordinator for a regional construction supply distributor based in La Union. His job revolved around inventory tracking, delivery schedules, and keeping contractors satisfied before deadlines. He was single, routine-driven, and social only with a small circle of friends from work and college. That night, as a regional television station broadcast the city's New Year's Eve celebration live from the nearby plaza, Paulo joined friends at a house a few blocks away, an old three-story structure inherited decades earlier and lightly renovated over time. The house belonged to a friend whose family had lived near the plaza since the 1970s. Like many old homes in the area, it had been expanded upward without modern reinforcement. The third-floor balcony was a narrow concrete extension, added years earlier for festival viewing. It was never designed to hold more than a few people at once. Paulo brought drinks, joked easily, and stayed near the railing to watch fireworks without forcing his way through the crowd below. As the evening went on, more friends arrived. Music played, and people drifted toward the balcony to get a clear view of the plaza, the same stretch of street where a regional television station had positioned a fixed wide-angle camera at the edge of the plaza, framing the crowd, fireworks launch area, and the row of older houses behind them for the live countdown. Fireworks were already being staged, lighting the street in brief flashes. By 11:45 p.m., as everyone anticipated the fireworks display, the balcony held more people than it was meant to support. As several people leaned forward together to see the first fireworks ignite, weight shifted toward the outer edge. Fine cracks near the base went unnoticed, hidden by layers of paint and shadow. At 11:59 p.m., as the live broadcast counted down the final seconds of the year, fireworks ignited above the plaza. The camera held its wide shot. In the background, just above the crowd line, the third-floor balcony shifted. A visible crack ran across the slab, and within seconds, the outer edge dropped. The collapse unfolded fully within the frame as the concrete tore away from the wall. 3 figures were carried down with the falling slab. Paulo struck a lower awning, rotated, and hit the pavement head first. The 2 others fell at a shallower angle, striking the ground feet first and absorbing the impact through their lower limbs. The camera remained live for several seconds as people scattered beneath the falling debris, before the feed abruptly cut away. Emergency services were called immediately. Police and medics arrived within minutes. Paulo showed no signs of life, blood mixed with broken concrete and firework debris along the roadside, as authorities secured the area and halted the celebration below. The 2 other individuals were found alive but critically injured and were transported to a nearby hospital. The medical examiner later reported that Paulo died from catastrophic head and neck trauma. The injuries were immediately fatal, with no chance of consciousness after impact. Toxicology tests were negative. Shortly after midnight, the regional television broadcast returned live, no longer focused on fireworks, but on flashing lights, cordoned streets, and officials redirecting crowds. The house was declared unsafe and partially demolished weeks later. City officials ordered inspections of nearby old structures around the plaza. It was August 19, 2018, in Evansville, Indiana, outside a mid-size riverfront park, where a regional music station hosted a free summer concert broadcast live on local television. The evening was warm and humid, with temporary fencing, vendor tents, and narrow entry lanes funneling thousands of people toward a single stage as daylight faded. Linda Carver was 58 and worked as a payroll clerk for a manufacturing supplier on the city's east side. She had held the same job for nearly 20 years, known for steady attendance and quiet reliability. Linda lived alone after her divorce and spent weekends visiting her grandchildren or watching local broadcasts she recognized by name. She rarely went to concerts, But the station promoting the event was one she listened to at work, and the headlining act played music she recognized from the radio. The show advertised open access, no tickets required, and a family-friendly crowd. The event was produced on a limited budget. Security staffing was contracted locally, and the layout relied on temporary barriers installed that morning. The stage sat at the end of a sloped lawn, with fencing guiding foot traffic through two main entrances. The broadcast crew focused on the stage and crowd energy, not the perimeter. Attendance exceeded early estimates by several thousand. By sunset, the area near the front was packed shoulder to shoulder, with little space to move once people stopped. Linda arrived shortly after 7 p.m. with her sister. They stood near the back at first, then edged forward as the opening act finished. The ground sloped downward toward the stage, and people leaned to see over others' shoulders. Weather alerts earlier in the day warned of possible thunderstorms, but the sky stayed clear. As the headliner prepared to come on, the station's live broadcast returned from commercial and showed a wide shot of the crowd pressing closer. Shortly after 9 p.m., movement started near one of the entrances. A surge rippled forward when people tried to push in from behind, believing the gates were about to close. The fencing flexed. Security personnel attempted to redirect the people, but the crowd noise drowned out their instructions. The slope caused bodies to tilt forward, transferring weight downhill. The pressure built unevenly, faster than anyone could step away from it. The surge reached the center in seconds. People stumbled. When one person fell, others tripped over them. Linda went down near the edge of a vendor tent where the ground dipped slightly. She was knocked onto her side and pinned as more bodies pressed over her. Feet and legs struck her back and shoulders. She could not stand because there was no space to push up. The pressure across her chest increased as people continued to fall forward. The live television broadcast cut from the stage to a wide crowd shot as the music stopped abruptly. The camera captured people waving for help and trying to pull others up. Linda was no longer visible beneath the mass of bodies. Emergency services were called immediately. As security opened a breach in the fencing to relieve pressure, the crowd slowly loosened as people were pushed backward. When responders reached Linda, she was unresponsive. She was removed from the crowd and transported by ambulance within minutes. Several others were treated on site for injuries. The broadcast remained live as anchors acknowledged a serious incident and urged viewers to avoid speculation while emergency lights filled the frame. Linda was pronounced dead at the hospital. The medical examiner later reported the cause of death as traumatic asphyxia. Her chest had been compressed for several minutes, preventing her lungs from expanding. Rib fractures and bruising were present, but there were no defensive injuries and no signs of intoxication. The findings were consistent with a crowd crush on a sloped surface. City officials suspended future large events at the park, pending review. The station ended the broadcast early and did not rebroadcast the concert footage. Linda's family declined interviews and held a small service attended by co-workers and relatives. Each year after, the station adjusted its summer programming, but the live shot of the crowd pulling apart that night still circulates online, marking the moment the concert stopped and never resumed. It was February 14, 2015, on a temporary ice road spanning the Red Lake River Basin near Red Lake Falls, Minnesota. The morning was clear and cold, routine on the surface. Trucks idled in line as checks wrapped early. A live broadcast filmed preparations while winter weakened what seemed solid. Alexei Morozov was 36, an independent freight driver based in northwestern Minnesota, with more than a decade of winter hauling behind him. He owned his truck, an aging sleeper cab he kept running through careful maintenance and long hours. Alexei was known among brokers as cautious and slow to argue, someone who double-checked routes and declined work when conditions felt wrong. That winter, financial pressure influenced his decision to accept late-season work. A family medical expense had depleted his savings, limiting his ability to decline hazardous contracts. A regional television network partnered with a freight broker to cover late-season ice hauling during a live winter special. The focus was logistics, not spectacle, and Alexei was hired as a contract driver with hazard pay for one crossing. He was told the road remained open under reduced axle limits and speed restrictions after recent cold nights. He understood ice roads require sustained freezes, and that repeated thaw cycles had weakened the surface through uneven layers and subsurface erosion below. As the truck rolled onto the ice road, the live broadcast followed from a fixed camera on the riverbank, framed wide to show the full crossing. From that distance, viewers could see uneven color beneath the tires, dark patches where refrozen meltwater thinned the surface. Wind swept loose snow across the road, briefly masking long, faint lines in the ice. Near the midpoint, the failure became unmistakable on screen. The truck's headlights dipped sharply, and a dark crack split outward from beneath the front axle, visible even from the wide shot. A loud crack cut through the ambient audio. The cab lurched forward as the ice broke open, and black water surged up around the front wheels. The camera operator reacted late, the image shaking as the lens tried to zoom. Within seconds, the fracture widened. The truck tilted sideways, lifted slightly as the rear axle shifted, then dropped again as the ice collapsed under the trailer's weight. Water climbed rapidly along the doors. One headlight vanished, then the other. The image blurred as the camera lost focus, and the live feed cut abruptly, leaving only a rippling black gap in the ice where the truck had been moments earlier. Emergency services were contacted immediately. Rescue teams arrived about 18 minutes later, delayed by distance and unstable ice. By then, the surface had sealed, leaving faint bubbles beneath darkened patches. Divers recovered the cab hours later, after reinforcing the ice and cutting an access opening. That evening, the network returned live to confirm the death and suspend operations. The medical examiner ruled drowning, with cold shock contributing. Flooding triggered an involuntary gasp, drawing water into his lungs. Near freezing temperatures caused rapid muscle failure, preventing escape. No fractures or major internal injuries were found. Loss of consciousness would have followed quickly. The segment was pulled before rebroadcast. Public response led to stricter limits on late-season ice road filming and live coverage. The ice road was formally closed by county officials the following morning. It was August 7, 2016, at a temporary motocross circuit outside Seremban, Malaysia, where a regional sports channel aired the championship round live. The afternoon heat hung over the dirt track. Grandstands were packed, engines revved, and the broadcast opened on riders lining up beneath sponsor banners. Arif Rahman was 26 and a well-known rider within local motocross circuits. He wasn't famous nationally, but locally he mattered. He grew up riding on palm oil service roads, worked weekdays at his uncle's motorcycle shop, and raced every weekend he could afford tires. Regular spectators recognized his number from regional events. He was known for clean landings, smooth throttle control, and taking risks only when the points justified it. The event was a freestyle-heavy format added to boost attendance. Riders were scored not just on lap time, but on aerial tricks performed over a widened tabletop jump near the main camera tower. The jump had been reshaped overnight to look bigger on television, with a steeper face and longer gap. Riders were warned that spacing would be tighter and timing critical. The heat made the dirt dry and loose, reducing traction on approach. Arif qualified well and entered the final run in third place. He needed a high-difficulty trick to move up. He had practiced a no-hander variation during warm-ups, but only once on the rebuild jump. Track officials kept the program moving to stay within the broadcast window. There were no extended gaps between riders. Engines roared continuously, and dust hung in the air. As the final run began, the live coverage followed the jump from a fixed sideline angle. Arif accelerated cleanly and launched high, releasing both hands mid-air as planned. At the same moment, a rider behind him, misjudging the spacing, hit the jump too early. The second bike rose faster and lower, drifting offline. The collision happened in the air, fully visible in the broadcast frame. The front wheel of the second bike struck Arif across the torso and shoulder. The impact twisted his body sideways while both bikes continued forward. Arif lost grip and separated from his motorcycle. The second rider clipped him again as they fell, sending Arif rotating headfirst toward the landing zone. Arif hit the dirt with extreme force. His helmet struck first, snapping his neck forward before his body folded beneath him. The second bike landed on top of him, the rear wheels spinning briefly against his back before stalling. The sound cut through the crowd, metal, plastic, and a dull impact that did not resemble a normal crash. Arif was motionless in the churned soil as other riders braked hard to avoid him. Officials rushed onto the track. The broadcast shifted to a wide overhead view as medics reached Arif, who did not move. His helmet was cracked at the chin bar. Emergency services were called immediately, and the race was stopped. Medical crews attempting resuscitation before the broadcast briefly returned to confirm a serious accident and then ended early. Arif was pronounced dead shortly after arrival at a nearby hospital. The post-mortem report listed catastrophic head and cervical spine trauma, along with massive internal injuries caused by blunt force. The collision in midair had delivered energy equivalent to a high-speed road crash, with no chance for protective gear to absorb it. Loss of consciousness would have been immediate. An investigation found that the modified jump reduced safe separation between riders and that no enforced delay existed between freestyle attempts. No charges were filed. The second rider survived with broken ribs and a fractured arm. The event was canceled permanently the following year. The track was leveled within weeks. The broadcast footage is never replayed, but many in the crowd remember exactly where they were standing when the engine stopped. It was August 18, 2018, in downtown Columbus, Ohio. Morning traffic moved steadily beneath an enclosed high-rise under active construction. Cranes paused between lifts, and a local television crew prepared for a scheduled live safety segment. The scene appeared controlled, while height, wind, and timing narrowed the margin for error. Marco DeLuca was 52, a construction foreman from Northwest Ohio. He had spent more than 3 decades on job sites, starting as a laborer and advancing to supervisor for a regional union-affiliated concrete and structural steel contractor. He was known for arriving before dawn, leaving after paperwork was finished, and addressing hazards directly. Workers described him as blunt, methodical, and consistent. His routine included handwritten logs, double-checking delivery slips, questioning optimistic projections, and requiring harnesses even for short tasks. Work was paused when conditions fell outside site limits. The interview was scheduled after recent safety concerns at unrelated projects owned by the same developer drew public attention, and the company agreed to a live segment to address those concerns. The interview took place on the 40th floor, where temporary exterior scaffolding supported facade and window installation. At that height, the wind shifted in uneven bursts. The platform relied on bolted connections tightened earlier in the week after a scaffold adjustment for material delivery. Marco's safety harness was clipped to a designated tie-off point on the same scaffold section, creating a common point failure when the platform gave way. A safety note recorded inconsistent torque readings on several fasteners, with retesting scheduled for the following day to avoid delaying concrete work below. That morning, a regional heat advisory and moderate wind warning were in effect, but filming proceeded. The segment aired live, and the reporter requested a clear view of the safety setup. Marco stood near the edge so the scaffold, guardrails, and tie-off points were visible behind him, while work on the platform was paused. As the interview continued on the live broadcast, crane activity resumed above to reposition materials. The movement sent vibrations through the structure and into the scaffold. At the connection points behind Marco, washers compressed and shifted around bolt heads, later confirmed to be under-torqued. The sounds blended with wind and traffic. The failure began abruptly. A sharp metallic snap cut through the audio as 2 bolts sheared almost simultaneously. Viewers saw the platform drop several inches and lurch. Marco stepped back as the guardrail bent outward and the decking tilted. Marco fell from the edge in full view of the live broadcast. He struck lower structural elements during the fall and then disappeared from the frame. Seconds later, a heavy impact sound reached the microphones, and the broadcast cut away. Emergency services were called immediately. Police, fire, and medical units arrived within minutes and secured the site. Marco was pronounced dead at the scene. The medical examiner listed the cause of death as massive blunt force trauma, with crushed chest and pelvis, ruptured internal organs, and fatal spinal injuries. Investigators determined the collapse resulted from improperly torqued bolts that failed under combined vibration and wind load, with heat noted as a contributing factor to material stress. The site was shut down for several weeks. Fines were issued, inspection protocols were revised, and the broadcast footage was preserved as evidence and later used in internal safety briefings. It was September 6, 2018, on a downhill highway outside San Fernando City, Pampanga, where a regional TV station aired a live traffic report. As vehicles slowed near a busy junction, a cement truck lost its brakes. The broadcast cut moments after the reporter was struck. Ramon Villarreal was 39 and had worked as a regional TV reporter for over a decade. He was not a national face, but viewers recognized him from morning weather hits and roadside updates during storms. He preferred fieldwork to the studio. Reporting live meant standing where things were actually happening, even when it was loud, hot, or uncomfortable. That afternoon, he stood on the shoulder near a concrete barrier, microphone in hand, traffic moving steadily behind him. Ramon had started in radio, then moved to television when the station expanded its local coverage. His job was practical: describe conditions, keep drivers informed, and get out of the way. He wore a reflective vest over a pressed shirt, an earpiece feeding instructions from the control room. The camera was framed wide enough to show traffic flowing downhill behind him, including a construction corridor used heavily by freight trucks. The slope was long and gradual, easy to underestimate. At the bottom sat a signalized junction that forced heavy vehicles to slow. Brake fade was a known risk on hot days. Earlier that week, transport officials had issued reminders about engine braking on descents, but enforcement was light. Ramon mentioned the congestion calmly, pointing behind him as he explained delays and alternate routes. As the live segment continued, a cement truck appeared at the top of the frame, moving faster than surrounding traffic. Its drum was full, the weight evident in the way the cab bounced slightly as it descended. Viewers could see it closing in quickly. Ramon kept speaking, unaware of the speed difference behind him. Seconds later, the truck swerved. Its brake lights flickered, then went dark. The sound reached the microphone first, a rising mechanical whine followed by a deep, uncontrolled roar. On the live broadcast, the truck veered left, clipped a sedan, and jackknifed. The drum shifted violently, pulling the cab sideways. The camera caught everything. The truck struck the concrete barrier and tipped. Ramon turned instinctively toward the noise just as the cab rolled through the frame. The front corner hit him at full momentum, throwing him backward. His body was driven into the barrier and pinned as the truck collapsed onto its side. The impact was brutal. Bones shattered on contact. The force crushed his lower body against the concrete, rupturing internal organs instantly. Wet cement burst from a damaged chute, spilling across the pavement and over him as the truck ground to a halt. The camera shook, then froze on the scene as the control room cut the feed. Emergency services responded immediately, halting traffic. Ramon was found unresponsive, pinned beneath twisted metal and hardening concrete. Extraction took time. The driver survived, citing brake failure. Investigators confirmed brake overheating and missed maintenance. The medical examiner ruled catastrophic blunt force and crush injuries, with loss of consciousness and no chance survival. The station suspended live roadside reporting indefinitely. The footage was never aired again, though some viewers remembered seeing the moment the broadcast cut. The intersection was redesigned months later with a truck arrestor lane added uphill. Ramon left behind a partner and 2 young children. His last broadcast was meant to warn drivers about traffic. Instead, it became a reminder of how quickly routine coverage can turn irreversible when heavy machinery, speed, and gravity converge in real time. It was May 23, 2016, when 34-year-old Cameron Blake positioned his mobile broadcasting unit along a desolate stretch of highway outside Moore, Oklahoma. Cameron worked as a meteorologist for a regional news station, known for his fearless storm coverage and ability to make complex weather patterns understandable to viewers. His childhood experience surviving a tornado drove his obsession with understanding these violent storms. Beside him sat 28-year-old Peter Webb, his camera operator, who had voiced concerns about their proximity to the developing supercell. Peter was cautious by nature, but he trusted Cameron's experience and deferred to his judgment, even as the radar showed the storm intensifying at an alarming rate. The afternoon sky had turned an ominous shade of green-gray. Cameron had positioned their modified SUV facing east to capture the storm's approach, explaining the rotation patterns to viewers watching at home. Among those viewers was his wife Jennifer, 7 months pregnant with their first child. The tornado touched down approximately 1 mile southwest of their position, appearing as a dark wedge-shaped column. Cameron's voice remained steady as he narrated the touchdown for nearly 15 seconds, his professional instinct overriding everything else. The funnel moved northeast at 35 miles per hour, closing the distance rapidly. Debris began pelting the vehicle, branches, gravel, and roofing material creating violent hammering sounds. Peter shouted that they needed to leave immediately, but Cameron continued broadcasting. The tornado's outer circulation reached them, and the SUV began rocking violently as gusts likely pushed 120 to 130 miles per hour near the vehicle. Hail and small debris hammered the glass. A broken 2x4 stud, roughly 4 feet long, punched through the driver's side window at an estimated 100 to 120 miles per hour. The tempered glass exploded into pellets. The board fragmented on the window frame, and the leading segment struck Cameron's left temple, causing a depressed skull fracture with bone driven into the brain. A second shard of aluminum siding scissored through the windshield and tore across his right clavicle, likely lacerating the subclavian artery. Bright arterial bleeding pooled across the seat within seconds. Peter managed to accelerate away from the tornado's path, screaming Cameron's name. The mounted camera, streaked with blood and debris, continued recording, its distorted footage catching only fragments of what happened inside the vehicle. Cameron's breathing became irregular and gasping, indicating severe brain trauma and imminent death. Peter drove for approximately 2 minutes before pulling over, pressing his jacket against Cameron's shoulder wound. But the damage was catastrophic. Blood had soaked through Cameron's clothing and pooled on the floor. His face had turned pale gray, his lips blue. The irregular gasping breaths came further apart, then stopped entirely. Peter felt for a pulse but found nothing. The live feed continued transmitting until the station finally cut to the studio. The tornado had deposited debris across the main highway, blocking emergency routes. Responders reached the location nearly 20 minutes later and pronounced Cameron dead at the scene from massive head trauma and blood loss. The station faced immediate backlash for not cutting the feed sooner. Peter resigned 3 weeks later. 11 weeks after his death, Jennifer delivered their daughter, Sophia, at full term and filed a wrongful death lawsuit against the station. It was November 8, 2017, when 41-year-old Lydia Grant arrived at a local television studio in Toronto for what should have been a routine cooking segment. Lydia was a culinary instructor who had been teaching French cuisine for years and making occasional appearances on a small regional lifestyle program that aired weekday mornings to a modest local audience. She had never experienced a serious incident on set before. She was known for her warm personality and expertise in classic techniques requiring open flame preparation. That morning, she wore a flowing silk blend blouse in burgundy paired with her chef's apron and her signature pearl necklace, a gift from her late mother. The segment focused on preparing crêpes Suzette, a classic French dessert requiring tableside flambé with Grand Marnier liqueur. Producers had debated cutting the flambé portion due to safety concerns, but Lydia insisted it was her signature. The live segment began with Lydia preparing orange butter sauce in a copper pan. She added approximately 4 ounces of Grand Marnier to the hot pan and tilted it toward the gas flame to ignite the alcohol vapors. The alcohol ignited as expected, thin blue flames flickering across the sauce. Lydia reached for a serving plate while holding the flaming pan, turning slightly away from the camera. Her silk blend blouse sleeve, which had come unbuttoned at the cuff, draped forward and made contact with the flames. It ignited instantly, flames racing up her right sleeve from wrist to shoulder in approximately 2 seconds as the fabric fused and burned against her skin. Lydia gasped and dropped the copper pan, which spilled flaming liquid across the kitchen island. She instinctively began batting at the flames with her left hand, which caused the fire to spread to her left sleeve as well. Derek rushed toward her with a kitchen towel but hesitated, unsure how to help. Flames reached Lydia's hair, which had been styled with aerosol hairspray 90 minutes earlier. Her hair ignited in a sudden flash, flames spreading across her scalp and down to her face and neck. Her initial screams turned to choking, gasping sounds as the heat seared her airways and burned her facial skin. She stumbled backward and fell sideways onto the studio floor. Derek threw the towel over her upper body, but the towel itself caught fire from the intensity of the burning synthetic fabric. James grabbed a fire extinguisher but fumbled with the safety pin. By the time he deployed the extinguisher, Lydia had sustained 2nd and 3rd degree burns across approximately 38% of her body, including her face, scalp, neck, both arms, and upper chest. Lydia remained conscious, making hoarse sounds as she struggled to breathe. The burned skin on her face had begun sloughing off, and her airways were rapidly swelling from thermal injury. Paramedics arrived and recognized the severity of her airway burns. Her breathing had become labored and wheezing. They performed an emergency intubation in the studio to secure her airway before transport. While beginning fluid resuscitation, she was transported to the regional burn center in critical condition with dropping blood pressure and signs of shock. Lydia Grant died that afternoon from complications of severe burn injuries, including respiratory failure and cardiac arrest. The network immediately suspended all cooking segments involving open flame. Derek required psychological counseling and took a 3-month leave. Though the station never released the footage, a short off-screen recording briefly circulated in local culinary circles online before being removed. It was September 22, 2019, when 47-year-old Dominic Hayes arrived at the Riverside Tower construction site in Portland, Oregon, to conduct a safety inspection for the city's building department. Dominic was a Canadian structural inspector contracted under an international peer review compliance agreement, with years of experience evaluating high-rise projects across North America. Known for his meticulous attention to detail, he was specifically requested to assess the tower's steel framework before the next phase of construction could proceed. The Riverside Tower was a 40-story mixed-use building that had reached the 28th floor when concerns arose about welding quality in the steel beam connections. Dominic had reviewed contractor reports showing some irregularities, but had been told by the construction foreman that all critical joints had been re-inspected and certified safe for his walkthrough. His colleague Sarah had questioned the timing of the inspection, but Dominic trusted the contractor's assurances. The inspection team included project manager Lisa Rodriguez, safety coordinator Jake Morrison, and a building department photographer. The assessment required Dominic to examine beam connections on the 28th floor while documenting any visible defects in the steel framework. The inspection began with Dominic positioned near the building's northeast corner, explaining proper welding techniques while moving systematically along the exposed steel beams. A sudden metallic shift rang through the steel frame. Not a clean ping, but the deep scraping sound of a connection slipping under load. At the time, the inspection team assumed it was just thermal movement in the beams, a common sound on unfinished floors, and no one recognized it as the onset of structural failure. Investigators later determined that the noise originated from a critical load-bearing joint, where substandard welding had left a hidden flaw. Once the connection slipped, the compromised weld fractured instantly under stress. Within moments, the failure spread to adjacent connections, causing a localized collapse limited to the northeast corner between the 28th and 26th floors. The drop halted when the load was redistributed across lateral bracing and intact crossbeams, preventing full progressive collapse of the tower. The floor began sagging toward the center. Dominic lost his footing as the steel decking buckled beneath him. A primary support beam twisted and separated from its connection, and the entire northeast section of the 28th floor gave way. The floor section dropped in a pancaking motion with Dominic falling through the failing structure. He dropped approximately 15 feet through twisted steel and debris before his body struck a horizontal I-beam at roughly 20 miles per hour. The impact broke his right arm, several ribs, and caused internal bleeding, but he remained alert and tried to grab onto the beam as the collapse continued. The partial floor failure extended downward through 2 additional levels before stabilizing, sending debris and structural members cascading through the open framework. As his body fell through the dust and twisted steel, the site's documentation drone, hovering in a fixed survey position, only caught a brief, obscured glimpse of movement before losing visual in the debris cloud. Dominic's body struck a concrete foundation wall at ground level at an estimated 45 miles per hour. His descent had been partially slowed by secondary impacts and structural interference during the collapse, preventing a full free-fall acceleration. The impact dislocated his shoulder and fractured his collarbone, while his torso compressed against the wall. causing severe internal injuries, including a punctured lung and damaged spleen. He sustained catastrophic internal injuries and was likely killed on impact. The collapsed floor section crashed down seconds afterward, burying much of the area in twisted steel and concrete debris. The drone, still hovering in its fixed survey position, passively recorded the aftermath. In the wide-angle feed, Dominic's body could be seen partially visible among the wreckage. Emergency responders needed over an hour to safely navigate the unstable debris field. Dominic Hayes was pronounced dead at the scene, along with 3 construction workers. It was November 23, 2017, when 29-year-old Phoebe Larson arrived at the staging area for Philadelphia's annual Thanksgiving parade. Phoebe worked full-time as an event coordinator, but volunteered her expertise to the parade committee each year as a passion project. Known for her infectious enthusiasm and organizational skills, she had participated in the parade for 6 consecutive years and had been promoted to lead handler for one of the parade's largest character balloons. The balloon was a 52-foot-tall cartoon character, requiring a team of 24 handlers using guide ropes to control its movement. Weather conditions that morning included sustained winds of 22 miles per hour, with gusts up to 34 miles per hour, approaching the parade's safety threshold. Parade officials had debated canceling the balloon portion, but decided to proceed with enhanced safety protocols. Phoebe had attended an early morning safety briefing, where handlers were instructed to immediately release ropes if wind conditions became dangerous. Her position was as lead handler on the front left guide rope, responsible for coordinating the team's movements. Her parents, visiting from Minnesota, were watching from the bleachers approximately 1 mile into the parade route. As Phoebe's balloon team approached the intersection of Market Street and 16th Street, wind speed suddenly increased. The balloon, which had been floating at a stable 15-foot altitude, suddenly lifted to nearly 30 feet as a gust caught its broad surface area. Phoebe immediately radioed parade control to report the dangerous conditions. A second, stronger gust estimated at 43 miles per hour struck the balloon from the west, causing it to tilt dramatically eastward and rise another 20 feet. The sudden upward force lifted 3 handlers on the eastern side completely off their feet. Phoebe shouted to her team to hold steady while the balloon continued rising. The balloon reached approximately 65 feet in altitude, and the guide ropes were at maximum tension. The front left rope that Phoebe was gripping suddenly snapped at a connection point near the balloon. The severed rope, still under extreme tension, recoiled violently downward and backward, the frayed end traveling at approximately 70 miles per hour. The rope struck Phoebe across her face and neck, the impact fracturing her jaw, shattering her left cheekbone, and crushing her larynx. She was thrown backward approximately 6 feet by the force of the impact, landing on her back on the asphalt parade route, with her head striking the ground. The impact with the ground caused a basilar skull fracture and immediate loss of consciousness. Blood began flowing from her nose, mouth, and left ear, classic signs of severe head trauma, while her body exhibited rigid posturing with arms and legs extended. Parade officials immediately halted the procession, and emergency medical personnel rushed to Phoebe's location. She was found unresponsive with irregular breathing and a weak pulse. Her pupils were unequal, the left dilated and non-reactive, the right constricted, indicating severe brain injury and increased intracranial pressure. Paramedics established an airway and began ventilation while preparing for immediate transport to the nearest trauma center. Her parents, who had witnessed the accident from the bleachers, were restrained by security as they attempted to reach her. Phoebe was transported to the trauma center, where emergency scans revealed massive intracranial hemorrhaging and severe brain swelling. Phoebe Larson was pronounced dead that afternoon after neurological testing confirmed complete cessation of brain activity. The parade was immediately canceled, and all balloon portions of future parades were suspended. Investigation revealed that the rope had been in service for 7 years, 2 years beyond its recommended replacement schedule. Her parents filed a wrongful death lawsuit against the parade organizers. The incident prompted multiple cities to revise their parade balloon safety guidelines, updating wind limits and equipment replacement schedules. It was February 16, 2015, when 38-year-old Grant Nichols arrived at the demolition site in Dallas, Texas, for what should have been the culmination of 6 weeks of meticulous planning. Grant was a demolition engineer and explosives expert who had overseen 67 successful building demolitions during his 14-year career. He specialized in urban demolitions requiring precise explosive placement to ensure structures collapsed inward without damaging surrounding buildings. Known for his methodical approach, Grant had earned a reputation as one of the most reliable demolition specialists in the Southwest. The project involved demolishing an 11-story office building that had been vacant for 3 years. Grant had spent 6 weeks planning the demolition, placing 847 individual explosive charges at strategic points throughout the building's support structure. The demolition was scheduled for Sunday morning to minimize traffic and ensure maximum safety. A 500-meter safety perimeter had been established, with police blocking roads and evacuating nearby buildings. Local news stations had been invited to broadcast the demolition live. Grant's observation position was in a reinforced command trailer located 550 meters south of the building. His wife, Rebecca, and their 8-year-old son, Tyle, were watching the broadcast from home. Grant performed his final safety check and initiated the firing sequence. The first series of explosions detonated on the building's ground floor as planned. The building's south side began collapsing inward as dust clouds billowed outward. An anomaly occurred. The building's north side failed to collapse as programmed, remaining partially standing while the south side fell. This created an unbalanced load that caused the remaining north structure to tilt southward rather than collapsing straight down. Grant immediately recognized the failure and shouted for everyone to move back. The tilting north section, approximately 6 stories of concrete and steel, weighing an estimated 2,400 tons, began falling southward like a toppling tree. The structure fell outside the planned collapse zone, aimed directly toward the safety perimeter, where emergency vehicles were positioned. Grant, realizing the danger to personnel, made the decision to leave the command trailer and run toward the perimeter to warn people. He exited the trailer and began sprinting north, waving his arms. The collapsing north section struck the ground approximately 480 meters from the original building footprint. The impact sent a pressure wave through the debris field, hurling concrete fragments and steel sections outward. A 12-foot length of number 11 rebar, weighing roughly 60 pounds, was launched by the force and struck Grant from behind while he was still running toward the perimeter. The bar hit across his upper back and neck at an estimated 30 miles per hour, severing his spinal cord at the C3 vertebra and fracturing his skull. Although the injury caused instantaneous loss of motor control, the remaining forward momentum carried his body several feet. Grant was thrown forward roughly 10 feet, his body tumbling across the ground before coming to rest face down. Television cameras had inadvertently captured Grant's final moments. Emergency personnel reached Grant, finding him unresponsive with no pulse. His neck was visibly deformed, and blood was flowing from his nose and ears. Paramedics began CPR, despite the obvious severity of his injuries. Grant Nichols was pronounced dead at the scene from a traumatic spinal cord transection and severe head trauma. The inquiry uncovered that a trio of demolition charges malfunctioned because of defective electrical connections, resulting in an uneven structural failure. The contracting firm faced legal liability proceedings and contract termination, which ultimately led to its insolvency. The incident led to updated demolition protocols, including mandatory secondary detonation verification checks before final firing sequences. It was July 9, 2016, when 33-year-old Jetta Howard arrived at the base camp in Chamonix, French Alps, for what should have been a routine mountain rescue operation. Jetta was a Norwegian mountain rescue specialist and paramedic who had been working in alpine rescue operations for 9 years. Known for her technical climbing skills and calm demeanor during high-stress operations, she had successfully participated in over 200 mountain rescues. The rescue operation involved extracting an injured climber from a steep rock face at approximately 11,150 feet elevation on Mont Blanc. A documentary crew had been filming a series about mountain rescue operations and had been granted live relay access for a regional alpine emergency broadcast, with helicopter footage transmitted in real time to local television affiliates. The injured climber, a German tourist, had fallen approximately 30 feet and sustained a compound leg fracture requiring immediate helicopter extraction. Weather conditions were marginal for helicopter operations, with gusty winds averaging 25 miles per hour and occasional stronger gusts. Jette had been selected as the rescue specialist to be lowered from the helicopter due to her experience with technical extractions. The helicopter pilot was a French aviator with 22 years of alpine flying experience. The helicopter departed with Jette secured in a rescue harness connected to a 100-foot steel cable winch system. The helicopter reached the injured climber's position and began hovering approximately 80 feet above the rock face. Jette was lowered from the helicopter while carrying medical equipment and a rescue litter. She reached the injured climber and began assessing his injuries while communicating with the helicopter crew via radio. While Jette was securing the climber into the rescue litter, a sudden wind gust estimated at 40 miles per hour struck the helicopter from the west. The helicopter was pushed approximately 50 feet eastward, causing the cable to swing dramatically. A second, stronger gust struck the helicopter, causing it to drop approximately 30 feet suddenly. The sudden descent created slack in the cable, which then snapped taut again, creating a violent whipping motion. Jette was caught off balance and lost her grip on the rock face. The helicopter was struck by a third gust, an updraft that lifted the aircraft suddenly upward approximately 40 feet. The rapid ascent put extreme tension on the cable system, which was rated for 2,000 pounds but was now supporting dynamic loading. The cable attachment point on Jette's harness, a carabiner that had been in service for 4 years, failed under the stress. Investigators later determined that the violent swing had side-loaded the gate, twisting it out of alignment. The carabiner gate broke open under the load, and Jette separated from the cable, beginning an immediate free fall from approximately 95 feet above the rock face. Her body fell for approximately 2.1 seconds, rotating backward as she dropped. She struck a sloping rock face at approximately 52 miles per hour, impacting primarily on her back and left side. The initial impact fractured her spine at T7 and T8 vertebrae, shattered her left shoulder blade, and broke 4 ribs. Her body bounced off the sloping rock and continued falling, tumbling through the air for another 40 feet before striking a second, more vertical rock face. The second impact occurred head first, crushing her helmet and fracturing her skull in multiple places, with bone fragments driven into her brain tissue. She bounced again and fell another 60 feet, her body now limp, before striking a narrow ledge. The final impact broke both legs, her pelvis, and her right arm. She came to rest approximately 195 feet below her initial position. The entire fall was captured by both the helicopter-mounted camera and a fixed base camp relay feed. The footage was still transmitting live when the fall occurred, giving viewers only a few seconds of the incident before the broadcast was abruptly cut from the control room. The injured climber witnessed the fall directly from his position in the rescue litter. A second rescue team reached Jette's position, finding her unresponsive with massive trauma. Jette Howard was pronounced dead at the scene from multiple traumatic injuries incompatible with life. Investigation revealed the carabiner failure was due to metal fatigue from repeated loading cycles, leading to new equipment replacement protocols. The injured climber survived but required extensive psychological treatment. It was February 14, 2017, at Lake Minnetonka, Minnesota. Morning conditions showed partly cloudy skies with temperature at 28 degrees Fahrenheit and light northwest winds. The National Weather Service had recorded unusual temperature fluctuations during the previous week, with daytime highs reaching 45 degrees Fahrenheit, followed by overnight lows dropping to 15 degrees Fahrenheit. These temperature swings had created unstable ice formations throughout the lake system, particularly near shoreline areas where warm underground springs fed into the lake. David Kellerman, 28, was a weekend weather reporter for a local cable channel who had taken the position 8 months earlier to pay off student loans from his meteorology degree. Kellerman's professional experience was limited to standard weather broadcasts from the station parking lot, with no previous experience reporting from ice-covered bodies of water. He had been passed over for the main meteorologist position twice and was attempting to demonstrate his field reporting capabilities through increasingly ambitious outdoor broadcasts. Family members later confirmed that Kellerman was unable to swim, a fact he had never disclosed to his employer. This information was not included in his employment records, and no swimming ability assessment had been conducted during hiring. At 6:45 a.m., Kellerman arrived at the Lake Minnetonka public access with camera operator Anthony Dane and sound technician Lisa Park. Local ice fishermen warned the crew about dangerous ice conditions near the shore, where warm springs created unstable formations. The fishermen advised staying at least 100 yards from the shoreline and recommended testing ice thickness before positioning equipment. Kellerman dismissed the warnings, stating the camera needed positioning closer to shore for optimal shot composition. He expressed confidence in his ability to assess ice safety based on visual inspection and meteorological training, despite having no practical experience with ice conditions. The live broadcast began at 7:23 a.m. during the morning show's weather segment. Kellerman positioned himself 25 yards from shore, where ice thickness measured only 2 inches over moving water, well below the commonly recommended minimum thickness for supporting a person. At 7:31 a.m., while using an ice auger to demonstrate ice thickness measurement, Kellerman stepped onto ice that appeared solid but had been severely weakened by underwater spring activity. The ice immediately gave way, creating a breakthrough approximately 3 feet in diameter. Dane reported hearing a sharp cracking sound before Kellerman disappeared through the ice surface. Dane's camera captured Kellerman's confused expression before he fell through the compromised ice section. Kellerman surfaced once, gasping and attempting to grab the ice edge. However, his heavy winter coat and boots quickly absorbed water and pulled him beneath the surface. On camera, he surfaced once and released a sharp gasp before slipping under again. Rescue personnel later noted the pattern was consistent with cold water shock contributing to rapid water inhalation. Dane contacted emergency services at 7:33 a.m. while the broadcast continued. A water rescue team arrived at 7:48 a.m. with cold water gear and located Kellerman at 8:02 a.m., about 15 feet from the breakthrough point, trapped beneath the ice shelf. He was brought to shore, where paramedics began CPR and rewarming procedures using standard hypothermia protocols. Efforts continued for 12 minutes with no signs of recovery. Kellerman was pronounced dead at 8:15 a.m. after resuscitation attempts failed. The broadcast showed portions of the recovery until the crew was guided back to shore. Later review confirmed the thin, spring-weakened ice had failed under his weight. It was May 15, 2016 at Riverside Park in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Morning conditions showed clear skies with a temperature of 72 degrees Fahrenheit and light southwest winds. Recent spring storms had brought heavy rainfall and sustained high winds to the region, causing significant damage to trees throughout the Tulsa Park system. Amanda Sterling, 38, was a nature correspondent who had transitioned from park ranger work to television broadcasting 2 years earlier. Sterling's climbing experience consisted of basic recreational activities without professional training in technical rope systems or arborist techniques required for commercial climbing operations. At 7:30 a.m., Sterling arrived at Riverside Park with camera operator Pete Wilson. Sterling selected a large oak tree based on its photogenic appearance and proximity to parking areas. However, the tree showed subtle signs of recent storm damage that were not immediately apparent without close inspection by qualified arborists. Park maintenance records later revealed the oak tree had been marked for professional assessment and potential removal due to internal rot discovered during routine safety inspections. The warning tags had been obscured by spring foliage growth and were not visible during Sterling's site selection. Sterling was using borrowed climbing equipment from a recreational climbing group rather than professional arborist gear. The equipment had not been professionally inspected and showed signs of wear, including frayed rope fibers and worn hardware. The segment had no dedicated safety coordinator, and no one on the small production team had training in evaluating climbing or tree-related risks. The live broadcast began at 8:30 a.m. during the weekend morning show. Sterling positioned herself on a branch approximately 35 feet above ground to demonstrate climbing techniques and safety procedures. The branch appeared substantial from ground observation, but had been significantly weakened by internal decay and storm stress. Sterling's climbing rope was attached to the compromised branch rather than the main trunk, violating fundamental tree climbing safety principles. At 8:47 a.m., while repositioning for a better camera angle, Sterling's weight caused the compromised branch to exceed its structural limits. Wilson reported hearing a sharp cracking sound before the branch broke completely at its attachment point. Wilson's camera captured Sterling's fall as she struck multiple smaller branches during descent before impacting the ground head first. The smaller branches provided no meaningful deceleration, but caused additional trauma during the fall. Sterling's head struck exposed tree roots and rocks at the base of the oak tree with tremendous force. Wilson's camera continued recording as Sterling remained motionless, with no signs of voluntary movement or response. Wilson contacted emergency services at 8:49 a.m. while continuing live coverage. Paramedics arrived at 9:03 a.m. and found Sterling unresponsive, with no pulse and no spontaneous breathing. They noted significant external head injuries and no reaction to basic neurological checks. Paramedics attempted resuscitation procedures for 15 minutes, using advanced life support techniques. Despite aggressive intervention, Sterling showed no response to treatment. At 9:18 a.m., emergency medical personnel pronounced Sterling dead at the scene. Later examination confirmed the fatal injuries resulted from the 35-foot fall, with the impact against exposed roots at the base of the oak tree, causing catastrophic damage to her skull and upper spinal structures. The live feed continued during the response as crews worked around the tree, and viewers saw the camera shift back toward the ground position once Wilson was guided away from the area. After several minutes of limited footage showing only the base of the tree and rescue personnel moving equipment, the station quietly ended the segment and transitioned back to studio programming. It was March 22, 2018, at a public high school in Phoenix, Arizona. Morning conditions showed clear skies with temperature at 78 degrees Fahrenheit and light southeast winds. The school's aquatic facility had recently completed extensive resurfacing work, creating more slippery conditions than the previous surface material. Rebecca Martinez, 44, was the school's swimming coach, conducting a live educational broadcast for the local public access channel during National Water Safety Week. Martinez had been taking prescription medication for chronic back pain that included warnings about potential effects on balance and coordination. At 1:30 p.m., Martinez arrived at the pool facility with camera operator Mark Thompson. The pool area contained several maintenance hazards that had not been properly secured following recent construction work, including a temporary electrical distribution panel positioned near the pool area containing 240-volt electrical connections. The electrical panel had been left energized to power pool systems during the transition period between construction completion and final electrical inspection. It had been placed in an unsafe location near the pool and had not yet undergone final safety checks. Several staff members later recalled noticing moisture collecting along the deck seams throughout the morning, likely from condensation and residual humidity trapped in the enclosed pool area. A few commented that the new surface seemed unusually slick even before filming began, but assumed it was normal for freshly applied coatings. The live broadcast began at 2:15 p.m. during the educational segment. Martinez positioned herself near the pool edge to demonstrate proper poolside safety techniques and supervision methods. At 2:28 p.m., while walking backward along the pool deck to demonstrate proper positioning for lifeguard supervision, Martinez stepped on a wet section of the newly resurfaced deck. The surface coating became extremely slippery when wet, causing her feet to slip out from under her. Martinez fell backward and struck the temporary electrical distribution panel with tremendous force. The impact caused her to make contact with exposed 240-volt electrical connections, resulting in immediate electrocution as electrical current passed through her body to the grounded pool deck. Thompson's camera captured the moment of electrical contact as Martinez's body convulsed from the electrical shock. The sound of electrical arcing was audible through the broadcast audio system, and visible sparks were captured by the camera. Thompson instinctively stepped back as the sparks intensified, and the broadcast briefly showed an unfocused view of the deck as the camera shifted in his hands. A sharp crack from the panel echoed through the enclosed facility, and several nearby students flinched at the sound as the lighting in the area flickered. The electrical contact caused visible burn damage, and Martinez collapsed immediately as her body went limp from the shock. The 240-volt current was sufficient to cause fatal electrical injuries within seconds, leading to immediate loss of consciousness. Thompson called for help at 2:30 p.m., and arriving responders first focused on securing the electrical hazard rather than initiating immediate treatment. Power to the area was cut before anyone could approach Martinez safely. Once the scene was declared clear, medical personnel checked for signs of life but found no pulse, no breathing, and no response to neurological assessment. The pattern of burns and the absence of cardiac activity indicated she had likely died within seconds of contacting the energized components. The broadcast gradually shifted away as crews cordoned off the deck and began documenting the equipment layout. Facility staff restricted access to the entire pool area, and later review confirmed that the combination of the wet resurfaced deck and the energized temporary panel created the fatal conditions. It was September 8, 2015, above Interstate 405 in Los Angeles, California. Evening conditions showed clear skies with unlimited visibility, but increasing winds from an approaching weather system, with gusts reaching 25 miles per hour and turbulence reported by other aircraft. Robert Hayes, 33, was a traffic reporter who had transitioned from commercial aviation after losing his airline position due to industry downsizing. Hayes had been conducting traffic reports for 18 months and was known for flying at lower altitudes than recommended to capture dramatic footage. At 5:15 p.m., Hayes departed from a local airfield in a Robinson R-44 helicopter for routine rush hour coverage. The aircraft had been experiencing intermittent engine warning lights that Hayes had not reported to maintenance personnel, believing them to be false indicators. The live broadcast began at 5:45 p.m. during peak traffic coverage. Hayes was providing updates while hovering at 400 feet above the Interstate 405 and Interstate 10 interchange, significantly below the recommended minimum altitude for traffic reporting operations. The Robinson R-44 requires a minimum of 500 feet of altitude for successful auto-rotation under ideal conditions. Hayes's operating altitude of 400 feet provided insufficient margin for emergency procedures, particularly in the urban environment, with obstacles and limited landing options. At 5:52 p.m., while maneuvering in gusty wind conditions to capture footage of a traffic accident, Hayes experienced complete engine failure during the maneuver. Later assessment of the recovered components indicated the engine had suffered critical internal damage that caused the loss of power during the maneuver. At the low altitude Hayes was operating, the sudden loss of engine thrust left no practical opportunity to establish a controlled auto-rotation. Witnesses monitoring the broadcast reported a brief emergency transmission, noting an engine failure just before the helicopter began a rapid, uncontrolled descent. The transmission ended abruptly, and the live feed showed the helicopter descending too rapidly for any recovery attempt. The combination of low altitude, turbulence, and the urban environment left insufficient time and space for a successful auto-rotation. Multiple ground-based traffic cameras captured the helicopter's uncontrolled descent toward the busy Interstate 405 corridor. Footage showed Hayes making control inputs during the descent, but the low altitude and urban layout left no viable emergency landing options. The helicopter struck a concrete overpass support structure during the uncontrolled descent. The impact occurred at 5:54 p.m. and was captured live by the traffic cameras feeding into the station's rush hour coverage. The concrete support structure was designed to withstand vehicle impacts, but created an immovable obstacle for the descending aircraft. The impact ruptured the fuel system, and a fire began burning around the wreckage. Emergency crews arrived at 6:02 p.m. and found Hayes with injuries incompatible with survival. Later examination confirmed Hayes died from massive blunt force trauma during the high-speed impact with the concrete support structure. Several traffic camera feeds continued transmitting smoke and debris scattered across the roadway until responders blocked the surrounding lanes and redirected the cameras away from the wreckage. After the final camera feed was shifted off the crash site, the station moved on from the live segment. The sequence of events indicated that the sudden engine failure at low altitude left no usable options for emergency descent, making the impact unavoidable once the helicopter began losing lift. It was July 4, 2017, in Sacramento, California, at a small outdoor event space. Morning conditions showed clear skies with a temperature of 82 degrees Fahrenheit and light southwest winds. The National Weather Service had issued a heat advisory for the Sacramento Valley, with forecast temperatures reaching 104 degrees Fahrenheit by mid-afternoon. Thomas Mitchell, 51, was a former restaurant owner who had lost his business to bankruptcy 6 months earlier. Mitchell was appearing on a morning show to demonstrate Independence Day grilling techniques as part of holiday programming. His restaurant experience included extensive commercial cooking, but limited experience with outdoor propane equipment. Holiday preparations were underway across the park, with early picnic groups settling near the river as temperatures climbed. Metal surfaces around the cooking areas had already warmed, and a few visitors later recalled a faint fuel odor near the grill, assuming it came from normal outdoor cooking. At 8:30 a.m., Mitchell arrived at the event area with morning show host Jennifer Adams and camera operator Steve Wilson. Mitchell was using a propane tank that had been dropped during transport, creating internal damage to the pressure regulator that was not visible through external inspection. The pressure regulator had sustained internal damage that affected its ability to maintain proper pressure levels and prevent dangerous gas accumulation. Mitchell had attempted repairs using hardware store components rather than professional propane equipment parts designed for the specific application. The live broadcast began at 9 a.m. during holiday programming. Mitchell positioned himself at a large outdoor grill to demonstrate seasoning techniques and cooking methods for holiday barbecues. At 9:17 a.m., while lighting the grill for his demonstration, the damaged pressure regulator allowed unburned propane to accumulate inside the grill housing. When Mitchell activated the ignition system, the gas ignited in a sudden flash fire that extended outward from the grill. The ignition caused a rapid burst of flame that enveloped Mitchell and ignited his clothing, producing a brief fire plume around the grill area. Wilson's camera captured the moment the flash fire erupted, and the sudden flame front pushed Mitchell backward from the grill as his clothing ignited. Flames spread rapidly across his shirt and arms, and park visitors hesitated to approach until the fire subsided enough for extinguishers to be used. When the flames finally subsided, Mitchell remained motionless beside the grill, his clothing reduced to charred fabric, and his skin showing extensive burn damage. Adams kept her distance while several visitors cautiously splashed bottled water onto the concrete near the grill, unsure whether any heat remained trapped inside the housing. Wilson continued filming from several steps back as thin smoke drifted through the cooking area and the surrounding picnic groups moved away. Responders arrived minutes later and immediately assessed Mitchell's condition, but found no signs of movement or any recoverable condition. With the area still radiating heat and scorch patterns spreading across the concrete, crews focused on securing the equipment and isolating the propane tank fragments before covering Mitchell's body. The broadcast shifted away once the grill was cordoned off and the crew was moved behind the safety line. A later inspection confirmed that propane had accumulated inside the grill housing due to the damaged pressure regulator, and ignition of that trapped gas caused the flash fire that engulfed Mitchell almost instantly. It was December 31, 2016, at a riverside event area in Louisville, Kentucky. Evening conditions showed partly cloudy skies with a temperature of 38 degrees Fahrenheit and light southeast winds. Recent rainfall had saturated ground conditions where temporary stage foundations had been installed for the New Year's Eve celebration. Michael Torres, 29, was a stage manager hired 3 days earlier when the original manager resigned over safety concerns. Torres had limited experience with large-scale temporary installations. Lighting technician Sarah Kim, 24, was working her first major outdoor event and was unfamiliar with temporary staging systems. Crowds had already begun gathering throughout the park despite the cold weather, and staff were moving equipment cases and cables across the damp ground while preparing for the midnight program. Several workers later recalled seeing small areas of standing water near the stage supports, but assumed it was typical after recent rainfall. The temporary stage measured about 40 feet wide and 30 feet deep, supported by a platform raised roughly 20 feet above the ground. The structure had been constructed using materials that met minimum code requirements, but had been designed under significant time and budget constraints. Recent rainfall had compromised ground conditions and reduced foundation stability. Later review of construction notes indicated the stage supports were not designed for the full weight of the lighting equipment, sound systems, and personnel present during the broadcast. The total equipment weight exceeded design capacity under the compromised soil conditions. The live broadcast began at 11:58 p.m. during the countdown to midnight. Torres was directing final lighting adjustments, while Kim operated overhead equipment positioning systems on the stage platform. At 11:59 p.m., while both workers were adjusting overhead lighting arrays, several support connections failed after the saturated soil beneath the platform shifted, causing the structure to lose stability. Event coordinator Mike Stevens reported hearing loud cracking sounds before a section of the stage platform collapsed. The partial collapse caused Torres to fall approximately 20 feet, along with several pieces of heavy lighting equipment. A 200-pound lighting fixture fell with the collapsing section and struck Torres in the head and neck area, causing immediate fatal trauma. Kim was thrown from the collapsing section but landed on the remaining stable portion of the stage, sustaining severe injuries, including multiple fractures and internal trauma. She remained conscious but was critically injured. Multiple cameras captured the collapse as it occurred during the live countdown broadcast. Emergency services were contacted immediately, while the live broadcast continued showing the wreckage and initial response efforts. Emergency crews arrived at 12:07 a.m. with equipment suited for stabilizing the damaged structure. Torres was found deceased at the scene, having died instantly from massive head trauma caused by the falling lighting equipment. Kim was extracted from the stage at 12:25 a.m. and transported to a nearby hospital with life-threatening injuries. Despite emergency surgery, Kim was pronounced dead at 12:47 a.m. from the severity of her traumatic injuries. Later examination confirmed Torres died from massive head trauma caused by impact with falling lighting equipment. Later findings noted Kim's fatal injuries were consistent with severe trauma sustained during the structural failure. The live broadcast captured the entire sequence from the initial collapse through the rescue operations. Later review of the damaged structure showed several weaknesses that likely contributed to the failure. The findings suggested the collapse was the result of overloaded equipment on unstable, rain-softened ground, leaving both workers with no chance of escape once the platform gave way. It was June 3, 2013, and afternoon sun cast warm light through the Culinary Network's Chicago studios as familiar sounds of food preparation filled Studio B. The professional kitchen gleamed under television lights, creating the perfect backdrop for Cooking with Passion, one of the network's most popular live cooking shows. Chef Antonio Rossi reviewed his recipe cards as he arranged ingredients on the marble countertop that had become his signature workspace. At 52, the charismatic Italian chef had built a television empire around his passionate cooking style and authentic family recipes passed down through 4 generations. His thick accent and animated gestures had made him beloved among home cooks, and his cookbook, Nonna's Kitchen, had spent 18 weeks on bestseller lists. Today's featured recipe was osso buco alla Milanese, a traditional braised veal dish Antonio learned from his grandmother in Milan. He'd immigrated to Chicago 25 years earlier with nothing but culinary skills and unshakable belief in authentic Italian cuisine. His restaurant Rossi's had become a Chicago institution, but television brought his passion to millions nationwide. Antonio's wife, Maria, and teenage sons Marco and Giuseppe watched from the studio audience. They'd grown accustomed to their father's theatrical cooking style but never tired of watching him transform simple ingredients into masterpieces while sharing stories of their Italian heritage. Today featured a flambe demonstration, a technique Antonio had perfected in high-end restaurants. The dramatic flames and theatrical presentation had become his signature move, always generating excitement. As the live broadcast began, Antonio's enthusiasm was immediately evident. He welcomed viewers with characteristic warmth, beginning osso buco preparation with practiced precision while sharing memories of cooking with his grandmother. The audience laughed at his animated descriptions of family dinner arguments and his grandmother's strict kitchen rules. The demonstration proceeded flawlessly through 45 minutes as Antonio braised veal shanks and prepared traditional gremolata garnish. His knife skills impressed as he minced garlic and chopped parsley with restaurant-quality precision. As the show neared conclusion, Antonio prepared for the flambe finale. He heated brandy while explaining the technique's science. "The alcohol must be perfect temperature," he said, eyes twinkling. "Too cool and nothing happens. Too hot and you lose control." Antonio's loose-fitting chef's coat, a trademark element, billowed as he moved around the set. The cotton fabric had been starched for crisp appearance under hot lights, making it more flammable than standard kitchen attire. As he reached across the stovetop to adjust pan position, his right sleeve passed directly over the open gas flame. The fabric ignited instantly, sending bright orange flame racing up Antonio's arm toward his shoulder. His initial reaction was patting flames with his left hand, but this only spread fire to his other sleeve. Panic set in as he realized the severity, his movements becoming erratic as he tried extinguishing growing flames, while millions watched in horror. In desperation, Antonio knocked over heated olive oil. The oil spilled across the stovetop and ignited immediately, creating a wall of flames blocking his path to the emergency shower. The sprinkler system activated within 30 seconds, but water pressure was insufficient to control the rapidly spreading grease fire. Crew members rushed on set with extinguishers, but Antonio had already suffered severe burns to his arms, chest, and face. Synthetic materials in his chef's hat had melted against his scalp, and he'd inhaled superheated air and toxic fumes. Antonio was transported to Chicago Memorial Hospital's burn unit, where he succumbed 72 hours later from complications related to severe burns covering 60% of his body and smoke inhalation damage. The show was immediately canceled, and the Culinary Network faced intense scrutiny over kitchen safety protocols. It was February 14, 2018, and pre-dawn darkness over Atlanta was giving way to sunrise as the city prepared for Valentine's Day. Inside WSB-TV studios, the familiar energy of morning show preparation filled the air as the team readied for Atlanta Morning, the city's highest-rated news program. Michael Thompson arrived at 3:45 a.m., his usual time for script review before the 5 a.m. newscast. At 48, he'd become Atlanta's most trusted morning voice over 12 years, known for his warm personality and genuine connection with viewers. His salt and pepper hair and kind eyes had made him a father figure to many, earning numerous community service awards. For 3 weeks, Michael had been experiencing crushing headaches, the worst of his life. The pain started behind his left eye and radiated across his forehead, sometimes accompanied by dizziness he blamed on television stress. His family doctor prescribed stronger medication, but the headaches kept worsening. Co-anchor Jennifer Martinez had worked alongside Michael for 8 years. Their on-air chemistry was legendary, making Atlanta Morning feel like conversation between old friends. His wife Karen and 16-year-old daughter Emma watched every morning from home. Karen had grown concerned about the headaches and scheduled a neurologist appointment, but Michael insisted on maintaining his normal schedule. The Valentine's Day show featured romantic segments and live proposals. As 5 a.m. began, Michael's professionalism was evident as he welcomed viewers. He and Jennifer shared love stories and bantered about dinner plans, their easy rapport creating the comfortable atmosphere that made the show Atlanta's favorite morning routine. The first hour proceeded normally with news, weather, and Valentine's features. Michael interviewed a florist and participated in a cooking segment. His energy seemed typical, though Jennifer later recalled he was squinting more under studio lights. At 6:23 a.m., during a live interview with a couple celebrating their 50th anniversary, Michael suddenly stopped speaking mid-sentence. He'd been asking about their marriage secret when his words simply trailed off, leaving awkward silence. Jennifer thought he was pausing for effect, but his confused expression indicated something was wrong. Michael's left hand moved to his head as he struggled to form words, his articulate speech becoming slurred and incomprehensible. The elderly couple looked concerned as Michael swayed in his chair, his face turning pale and grayish. Jennifer tried covering, but it was clear something was terribly wrong. Without warning, Michael collapsed forward onto the news desk, his body going limp as he lost consciousness. The impact knocked over coffee cups and scattered papers, creating chaos broadcast live to hundreds of thousands of viewers. Jennifer screamed his name while signaling for help, her professional composure cracking. Studio cameras remained focused as emergency medical technicians, coincidentally at the station for training, reached Michael within 90 seconds. His breathing was irregular, pupils dilated and unresponsive, classic signs of massive stroke. Viewers watched in horror as CPR was performed where moments before Michael had been sharing Valentine's joy. The station cut to commercial after 3 minutes of live emergency coverage. Social media exploded with concern as viewers shared shock at witnessing their trusted anchor fighting for his life on television. Michael was transported to Emory University Hospital, where doctors confirmed a massive hemorrhagic stroke from a ruptured cerebral aneurysm. Despite aggressive treatment, Michael was pronounced dead at 11:34 a.m. from severe brain hemorrhaging. The show went off air for the week as WSB-TV grieved their beloved colleague. Viewers flooded social media with tributes, remembering how Michael had brightened their mornings and connected them to their community. It was September 27, 2007, in Yangon, Myanmar. For 10 days, Buddhist monks in red robes had led peaceful protests through the streets, chanting for democracy and freedom. What began as demonstrations against rising fuel prices had evolved into something much larger, a direct challenge to the military government's iron grip on power. In the middle of this unfolding drama was 50-year-old Kenji Nagai, a Japanese journalist who had arrived just 2 days earlier. Working for APF News, Nagai was no stranger to danger. He had spent years reporting from Afghanistan, Iraq, and Palestine. His mission was always the same: go where others wouldn't, and show what was really happening. That morning, Nagai positioned himself near the Sule Pagoda in downtown Yangon. The area was filled with protesters, some waving flags with the peacock symbol of Aung San Suu Kyi's political party. Then military trucks arrived and soldiers emerged holding rifles and shields. The military issued a warning: leave in 10 minutes or face the consequences. The protesters stood their ground. Nagai kept filming, his camera capturing what would soon become his final assignment. "The army has just arrived," Nagai narrated into his camera. "The army is over there. They are heavily armed." These would be his last recorded words. What happened next was captured in photographs that would shock the world. As soldiers began firing into the crowd, Nagai continued documenting the chaos. When a soldier approached him, Nagai didn't run. Instead, he held his camera higher, determined to record the truth. The soldier pushed Nagai to the ground and shot him at point-blank range. A bullet tore through his chest, piercing his heart. Even as he lay dying, witnesses reported that Nagai continued to hold up his camera, trying to document what was happening around him. Reuters photographer Adres Latif captured the haunting scene: Nagai lying on the ground, a soldier standing over him, rifle in hand, while Nagai's camera remained clutched in his grip. In the next frame, the soldier walked away. Nagai never moved again. The Myanmar government claimed Nagai had been caught in crossfire, but the photographic evidence told a different story. The images showed a deliberate act, a journalist executed for doing his job. News of Nagai's death sent shockwaves through Japan. The government demanded answers. Prime Minister Yasuo Fukuda called it extremely unfortunate, while the foreign minister pressed Myanmar's UN representatives for accountability. Myanmar eventually offered an apology, but no one was held responsible. Nagai was the only foreigner killed during the protests, which came to be known as the Saffron Revolution. At least 9 others also died that day. In the days that followed, The military raided monasteries and arrested hundreds of monks, effectively crushing the uprising. For 16 years, Nagai's sister Noriko Ogawa sought closure, particularly requesting the return of her brother's missing camera. The wait ended in 2023, when journalists from the Democratic Voice of Burma announced they had received Nagai's camera from someone who wanted to set things right. When the camera was finally returned to Noriko in Bangkok, she found peace in viewing her brother's final footage. "I think my brother was waiting for this day too," she said. "I want to bring it to his grave." The footage showed Nagai calmly reporting just before chaos erupted, a professional to the very end. No one has ever been held accountable for his death, but Nagai's work hasn't been forgotten. In 2009, the Burma Media Association created the Kenji Nagai Award to honor journalists in Myanmar who risked their lives to report the truth. The first recipient was a female Burmese reporter known only as Akayar, who continued Nagai's legacy of fearless reporting. Kenji Nagai's death stands as one of the most disturbing moments ever captured on camera, a visual testament to both the courage of journalists and the brutal lengths some regimes will go to silence them. His final act was showing the truth, and 16 years later, his camera completed what he started. It was October 6, 2007 in Bangkok, Thailand. The children's program Mani and the Golden Frog was broadcasting live on Channel 5, as it had every Saturday morning for years. Behind the colorful puppet stage stood 26-year-old Krit Sorachai, whose expressive voice brought the character of Tong, the Golden Frog, to life. No one could have predicted that this episode would be his last. Krit grew up in Chiang Mai, the son of a traditional Thai puppet master. From childhood, he showed remarkable talent for bringing inanimate objects to life. While studying at Chulalongkorn University, he began performing at local children's events. His unique ability to create distinct voices caught the attention of Channel 5 producers, who hired him part-time for their flagship children's show. Despite his on-screen success, Krit's life had been challenging. Friends later revealed he had been working 3 jobs to support his family. Besides puppeteering, he worked nights at a call center and weekends at his uncle's restaurant. He often slept just 4 to 5 hours between shifts. The week before the incident, he had mentioned feeling unusually tired and experiencing fluttering in his chest, but attributed it to stress and caffeine. The morning of October 6th began normally. Krit arrived at the studio at 7:30 a.m., reviewed the script with co-host Suchata, and prepared his puppets. The first segment went smoothly as Mane, operated by Suchata, and Tong taught young viewers about friendship. 20 minutes into the broadcast, however, something changed. During a scene where Tong was supposed to explain sharing, Krit's performance took an unexpected turn. His puppet began swaying oddly, and instead of following the script, he started repeating phrases that weren't in the show. "The curtain is thin, and we're almost out." His voice had changed too, deeper, almost slurred. Suchata tried to redirect him, improvising lines to bring the skit back on track. "Tong, are you feeling okay today?" she asked through her Manet puppet. "I can see through now," Krit replied in Tong's voice. "The light is very bright." Seconds later, viewers heard a thud as Krit dropped behind the stage. The puppet fell limp, dangling from the edge of the set. Suchata, thinking it might be an improvisation, continued briefly before realizing something was wrong. When Krit failed to reappear for the next scene, the director cut to a commercial break. Behind the scenes, crew members found Krit unconscious on the floor. A production assistant with medical training began CPR while someone called for an ambulance. Despite their efforts, Krit never regained consciousness. Paramedics arrived within minutes but couldn't revive him. He was pronounced dead at the scene. The autopsy revealed that Krit had suffered cardiac arrest caused by undiagnosed myocarditis, an inflammation of the heart muscle. Doctors explained that his exhaustion and stress had likely exacerbated the condition. His strange final words were attributed to oxygen deprivation affecting his brain in the moments before collapse. Channel 5 immediately canceled the episode and issued a brief statement mourning Krit's passing. However, a home recording of the broadcast leaked online, spreading rapidly across Thai social media. Viewers were disturbed by the eerie nature of his final performance, with some claiming his last words seemed prophetic. The incident sparked national conversation about working conditions in Thailand's entertainment industry. Krit's family revealed he had been working 80-hour weeks across his 3 jobs, highlighting the precarious situation of many young performers. In response, the Thai Actors Association called for mandatory health screenings and reasonable working hours. Today, a small memorial plaque hangs in Channel 5's studio, remembering the young puppeteer whose life ended too soon. Mani and the Golden Frog eventually returned to air with a new puppeteer, but the show was never quite the same. Krit's final performance remains one of Thailand's most disturbing live television moments, a tragic reminder of the fragility of life, even when the cameras are rolling. It was June 22, 2013, in Brno, Czech Republic. The humid evening air inside the repurposed industrial warehouse was thick with the scent of sweat and cheap cologne, vibrating under the low-frequency thrum of a local punk band's soundcheck. Pavel Dvorak, 29, was a regional radio DJ who had recently been tapped to host Vibe Brno, a low-budget youth television program. Known for his self-deprecating humor and larger-than-life personality, in an interview, Pavel had previously mentioned that he felt an intense pressure to prove he wasn't just a radio face. He was often encouraged by the show's edgy clothing sponsors to perform high-energy, fearless segments to boost the program's social media engagement and appeal to a younger, more cynical demographic. The environment of a live youth music show is technically chaotic, involving handheld cameras, moving floor crowds, and unpadded concrete flooring. For such events, safety is usually managed through rigid scripting and professional plants in the crowd for any physical interaction. However, Vibe Brno operated on a shoestring budget, relying on the raw energy of the audience rather than trained stunt coordinators or safety flooring. On this evening, the show was celebrating its season finale. Pavel decided, without informing the floor manager or the security team, to conclude the broadcast with what looked like a crowd surfing attempt from the 5-foot-high stage. While he's facing the crowd backwards, there was no rehearsal and no communication with the teenagers standing directly below the stage's edge, many of whom were distracted by their phones or the loud music. The tension escalated as the band reached the crescendo of their final song. Pavel stood at the very edge of the stage, his back to the audience, waving his arms to pump up the energy. The floor manager signaled for him to wrap up the segment, but Pavel leaned further back, caught up in the adrenaline of the live broadcast. Despite the visible gaps opening in the crowd as the music grew more aggressive, he gave a final thumbs up to the camera and launched himself into the empty air. The incident occurred at 9:44 p.m. As Pavel propelled himself backward, the crowd below did not converge. Instead, seeing a 220-pound man falling toward them, they instinctively recoiled and parted. Pavel fell through the gap, his body rotating slightly in midair. He struck the polished concrete floor with the back of his head first, producing a sharp impact sound that was picked up by his wireless lapel microphone. His body went limp immediately, his arms and legs stiffening unnaturally on impact. The band stopped playing mid-chord. The feed remained live for 30 seconds, showing an empty stage. After several seconds of confusion, a security guard called 155 at 9:46 p.m. But the narrow access roads leading to the warehouse delayed the EMS arrival for 11 minutes. Pavel was transported to a regional trauma hospital in critical condition. He was declared dead at 3:15 a.m. due to severe traumatic brain injury. The post-mortem report later detailed a massive fracture of the occipital bone at the base of the skull, consistent with a high-velocity impact. The impact had caused a massive coup-contre-coup injury, resulting in immediate, uncontrollable brain swelling and a severe intracranial hemorrhage. Vibe Brno was canceled the following morning. The tragedy triggered a local debate regarding the lack of regulation for unscripted stunts in youth-targeted media and the ethical responsibilities of producers. It was November 14, 2018, in Debrecen, Hungary. The morning was bitterly cold, and inside the regional television studio, the heating system struggled to overcome the draft, creating a sharp contrast between the warm stage lights and the frigid air settling near the equipment. Laszlo Fekete, 52, had spent 3 decades as a licensed appliance repairman before becoming a consumer safety advocate. He was the host of Safe Home, a segment dedicated to exposing the dangers of counterfeit or substandard household goods. Laszlo was a meticulous blue-collar man who felt a deep responsibility toward low-income families who often bought cheap imports to save money. The technical focus of his report involved resistive heating elements found in off-brand space heaters. These devices function by passing a high current through a wire coil to generate heat. In regulated products, the metal casing is grounded, and the internal wiring is double insulated. However, in the cheap, uncertified units Laszlo was investigating, the internal components were often secured with brittle plastic clips that could fail under high temperatures, potentially allowing a live wire to touch the exterior metal frame. During the live broadcast, Laszlo prepared to demonstrate a specific unbranded heater that had been linked to several house fires. He noted into his lapel microphone that the wiring felt flimsy and the unit was humming irregularly, a sign of mechanical vibration in the poorly secured heating element. Despite the warning signs and the fact that he was working on a studio floor slightly damp from the boots of the crew, he proceeded with the demonstration to ensure the segment finished before the commercial break. The tension rose as the heater began to emit a faint, acrid smell of ozone and melting plastic. Laszlo explained that the internal thermostat appeared to be failing, as the unit was becoming dangerously hot to the touch. He reached out to adjust the metal casing to show the camera the lack of heat shielding. He was not wearing rubber-soled shoes, and his palms were slightly damp from the humidity of the studio. A solder joint inside the heater melted, allowing a 230-volt live wire to snap loose and press directly against the interior of the metal housing. The moment Laszlo's hand made contact with the casing, the entire exterior became energized. His muscles instantly entered a state of tetany, causing his fingers to clamp tightly around the frame in an involuntary grip. The current passed through his body to the ground. Laszlo stiffened, his body arching violently as the electrical shock disrupted his heart's normal rhythm. He remained briefly upright, locked to the vibrating heater, before his grip finally released and he collapsed backward. The studio fell into a heavy, suffocating silence while the camera remained live, capturing his motionless body on the studio floor. The floor manager called 112 at 9:24 a.m. It took 14 minutes for the paramedics to reach the secure studio floor. They performed several rounds of ACLS, but with no response to the defibrillator, they declared him dead at the scene. The post-mortem report documented deep, charred electrical burns on the palms of both hands. Post-mortem findings indicated the electrical injury disrupted the heart's electrical conductivity, leading to cardiac arrest. The official cause of death was listed as electrocution-induced cardiac arrest, with collapse occurring immediately and death pronounced at the scene. The raw broadcast footage was later reviewed by safety authorities as part of a wider investigation into counterfeit household appliances. Following the burial, a brief statement was read by a family representative, emphasizing Laszlo's lifelong commitment to technical standards. It was February 8, 2016, and the winter morning brought a sharp 23-degree chill to a small Boston-based production studio, preparing to air a live Valentine's Day episode of its regional cooking program. The set, designed to resemble a compact home kitchen, had undergone routine equipment servicing the week before, including maintenance on a gas range used for on-camera demonstrations. The work had been completed near the end of the technician's shift, and one of the fittings had not been tightened to proper torque, leaving a connection vulnerable to gradual separation under thermal and vibration stress. Tony Ricci, 56, organized his ingredients with the steady movements of someone who had spent decades in a professional kitchen. He had built a long career in the food industry, known locally for creating dishes rooted in long-standing family traditions. The show's producers invited him to demonstrate a slow-cooked winter recipe, viewing his appearance as a way to bring warmth and familiarity to an otherwise cold season. Cooking had shaped Tony's life from an early age. Over the years, he had become recognized within the regional dining community for emphasizing simple, well-prepared meals using traditional methods. His participation in the program reflected his interest in helping home cooks feel more confident in the kitchen, a theme he often revisited during guest appearances. As the crew finished camera checks, a faint odor of gas briefly circulated near the rear of the set, but with multiple dishes prepped and numerous heat sources active, it went unnoticed. The weakened connection beneath the range had begun to leak small amounts of natural gas at a rate too subtle to trigger immediate alarms. Because the ventilation hood operated at a low setting for audio clarity, The gas accumulated slowly in the area surrounding the cooktop. Filming began smoothly as the live segment went on air, with Tony explaining the preparation steps with a steady conversational pace while browning ingredients in a heavy pan. As he transitioned to a low-heat phase of the recipe, he attempted to adjust one of the burners that had extinguished during a pan shift. When he pressed the ignition control, the electrical spark ignited the pocket of accumulated gas surrounding the range. The ignition produced a rapid flash fire rather than a large explosion. A brief pressure wave pushed equipment backward, and the flame front extended outward several feet before dissipating. The flash was visible on air for a moment before the control room switched the broadcast to a standby graphic. Tony, standing closest to the point of ignition, was knocked against the counter by the force of the flash and immediately fell to the floor. Crew members saw a burst of flame sweep across the cooktop area, but did not witness any ongoing fire, as the flash extinguished as quickly as it formed. The studio alarm system activated within seconds, prompting an immediate evacuation and emergency call. Paramedics reached the scene in under 4 minutes and found Tony unresponsive with signs of severe thermal injuries concentrated on his upper body and face. He was transported to a nearby hospital, where physicians initiated advanced treatment, but his injuries were not survivable. He was pronounced dead shortly after arrival. It was August 12, 2017, and the midday heat reached 94 degrees in Atlanta as a small regional television studio prepared to air a live episode of its Saturday morning educational program for children. The production featured an elaborate chemistry demonstration set, complete with laboratory equipment and chemical storage cabinets that had been installed to make science education more engaging for young viewers. Rebecca "Miss Becky" Johnson, 38, arranged her materials with the practiced organization she used in her elementary school classroom. She had taught for more than a decade and often volunteered during summer months to lead televised lessons intended to support young learners. Her focus for the day was a basic introduction to chemical reactions, using safe household materials to demonstrate how different substances interact when combined. Education had shaped most of Rebecca's adult life. She had earned her teaching credentials through a local university and had become known in her district for developing approachable lessons that helped students with varying learning needs. Participating in the show allowed her to extend that style to a broader audience, and she approached each segment with the same preparation she used in her regular classroom. Earlier that morning, members of the technical team had noticed a strong chemical odor coming from the storage cabinet containing cleaning supplies used for the demonstrations. The cabinet's ventilation system had malfunctioned, causing dangerous fumes to accumulate inside the enclosed space. However, the maintenance crew assumed the smell was from the previous day's cleaning and failed to investigate further or test the air quality before the live broadcast. The episode began on schedule, with Rebecca introducing the chemistry lesson in a calm, upbeat tone. She moved between the demonstration table and the chemical storage cabinet while speaking directly to the camera. As part of her planned lesson, she opened the cabinet to retrieve what she believed were safe household cleaning products for a simple reaction demonstration. As Rebecca opened the cabinet door, a dense buildup of trapped chlorine fumes drifted outward into the studio, spreading quickly through the small, poorly ventilated space. The gas had formed when incompatible cleaning chemicals had been improperly stored together, creating a deadly mixture that had been accumulating overnight in the poorly ventilated cabinet. Rebecca immediately began coughing and gasping as the toxic fumes overwhelmed her respiratory system. She staggered backward from the cabinet, her eyes streaming and her breathing becoming increasingly labored as the chlorine gas burned her lungs and throat. The invisible poison quickly spread throughout the small studio space. The live feed captured Rebecca's distress as she collapsed to her knees, clutching her throat and struggling to breathe. The director in the control room cut immediately to a standby graphic as studio staff rushed to help, but they too began experiencing respiratory distress from the toxic gas cloud. Emergency responders arrived in under 4 minutes, wearing protective breathing equipment, and found Rebecca unresponsive but still breathing shallowly, with clear signs of severe chemical inhalation injury. She was transported to a nearby hospital and placed on assisted ventilation, but her lungs rapidly filled with fluid from acute chlorine-induced pulmonary edema. Despite treatment, she died several hours later from respiratory failure. A post-incident investigation concluded that improper chemical storage and a malfunctioning ventilation system had allowed chlorine gas to accumulate inside the cabinet. The studio suspended all production while investigators completed a full safety audit, and regulators later issued fines and required stricter handling protocols for any on-air demonstrations involving chemicals. Her colleagues created a small educational grant in her name to support teachers developing safe science lessons for young students. It was May 15, 2018, and the late spring afternoon brought a mild 72-degree breeze through a small Seattle-based studio as the regional program Pacific Northwest Outdoors prepared to air its live season finale. The set featured a compact indoor trail simulation area used for demonstrating gear, safety practices, and basic wilderness movement techniques. For this broadcast, the production team had arranged a narrow wooden bridge prop to illustrate how hikers could assess footing on unstable or weathered surfaces. Mike Harrison, 44, reviewed the day's materials while checking the demonstration equipment. He had spent more than 15 years guiding small groups through forested terrain across the region, focusing on beginner-friendly education and responsible outdoor habits. His television appearances were meant to help new hikers feel more comfortable navigating trails, and he approached each broadcast with the same measured clarity he used on his guided trips. Mike's path into outdoor education had been shaped by years spent backpacking through state parks and working with youth groups. Over time, he became known within the local outdoor community for teaching practical skills without dramatization, simple, steady techniques to help people avoid getting hurt or lost. The program valued his calm approach, and the finale was built around basic demonstrations meant for families beginning to explore the outdoors in warmer months. Earlier that week, the studio's small bridge prop had undergone adjustments to improve camera visibility. A new support hinge had been installed on one side to allow the structure to fold for storage, but the hinge was not properly secured. During the morning setup, members of the crew noticed a slight shift in the platform when weight was applied near the outer edge. With the segment scheduled tightly, they stabilized the bridge with temporary bracing beneath the center panel, assuming it would remain steady for a brief demonstration. When the live broadcast began, Mike introduced the segment's theme, recognizing unstable terrain and identifying common hazards on maintained trails. He moved along the demonstration area, explaining how weathering and erosion could weaken natural crossings. Approaching the wooden bridge prop, he described the importance of testing footing before fully committing weight. As he stepped onto the structure for the on-air demonstration, the temporary bracing beneath the bridge shifted. The unsecured hinge on the side support rotated unexpectedly, allowing the bridge deck to tilt sharply downward. Mike attempted to adjust his footing, but the sudden drop caused him to fall sideways off the edge of the platform. The live feed showed his unexpected fall for a moment, before the control room cut to a standby graphic. Studio staff reached him within seconds. Mike had landed forcefully on the lower section of the set, striking the side of his torso and head against the rigid support frame beneath the bridge prop. He was unresponsive when the crew assessed him. Emergency responders arrived in under 4 minutes and initiated advanced life support procedures. Mike was transported to a nearby hospital, where medical staff identified severe internal injuries consistent with a high-impact fall onto a rigid surface. Despite continued efforts, he was pronounced dead shortly after arrival. A subsequent investigation determined that the hinge installation had been incomplete and that the temporary bracing did not provide reliable stabilization for live demonstration use. The studio discontinued use of collapsible set pieces and implemented stricter pre-broadcast equipment checks. Colleagues later created a small outdoor safety education initiative in Mike's name to support beginner hikers learning basic field awareness skills. It was November 9, 2015, in Lyon, France. A regional civic hall had been converted into a small debate venue for a community television segment that would be recorded and broadcast later in the week. About 50 residents sat in folding chairs facing a low platform where 5 speakers discussed local housing policy. cameras stood on tripods near the back, their red lights steady as the discussion began. The event was routine, part of a series of taped town hall discussions the city used for public outreach. One of the panelists was 61-year-old Jean-Marc Delcourt, a long-serving city council member known for his careful attention to budgets. The taping had started just after lunch, and the panel had already gone through several topics. The room was warm from the lights, and several speakers dabbed their faces with tissues between questions. Jean-Marc spoke clearly, gesturing often, pausing occasionally to check his notes. Technicians in the back monitored the sound levels while the host tried to keep the discussion within its time limits. About 20 minutes into the recording, tension increased as the speakers began to argue over rent control measures. Jean-Marc leaned forward to answer a pointed question from another guest. Mid-sentence, his voice caught. He straightened slightly, one hand braced on the table. For a few seconds, no one reacted. The other guests kept talking over him. Then his pen dropped to the floor. He pushed his chair back and tried to stand, but his movement faltered. The moderator stopped speaking and turned toward him, asking if he was all right. Jean-Marc's right arm dropped, and he slumped sideways. Chairs scraped against the floor as the nearest panelist reached out to steady him. A murmur passed through the audience. One of the camera operators called for the lights to be dimmed while crew members stepped forward. A staff medic and a volunteer from the municipal team rushed to the stage and lowered him gently to the ground. They began chest compressions, while another person used a handheld radio to call for emergency services. The cameras kept running for several seconds before someone shouted to cut power to the recorders. The host stood off to the side, holding a clipboard, as technicians guided the audience out through a side exit. Paramedics arrived within minutes and took over from the crew. The rest of the panel waited outside the hall, uncertain whether the taping would resume. The footage from the debate was never used. Editors replaced the planned segment with a short civic update and took the event listing off the local channel's schedule. A short notice posted later that week mentioned that filming had been stopped due to a medical emergency. The community program resumed the next month with a different panel and no reference to the incident. It was December 14, 2013, in São Paulo, Brazil. A small production team had been hired to record a Christmas-themed segment for a local children's program inside a shopping mall. The goal was to film short clips for the mall's holiday campaign, children meeting Santa, naming their wished-for gifts, and ending each take with a burst of confetti. The setup was simple: a red chair in the center, boxes wrapped in gold paper around it, and a low wooden platform hiding the small confetti rigs. 27-year-old João Ribeiro worked as a stage assistant. For this event, he wore the Santa costume and handled the prop triggers beneath the chair. The production crew had built the rig earlier that morning. It used small air pressure canisters to release paper confetti upward in short bursts. One technician had adjusted a canister after moisture caused a minor clog, but hadn't repeated the full pressure test because the next group of children was already waiting. By mid-afternoon, the filming had run smoothly through several rounds. Parents stood near the ropes taking photos while production staff guided children one by one to the chair. João pressed the release button after each take, letting the confetti fall while assistants swept up between groups. The final segment of the day was meant to feature a larger burst timed to music from a speaker behind the backdrop. As the next group approached, João reset the mechanism and signaled that he was ready. The director counted down. The children began their lines, reading from cue cards, while mall shoppers paused nearby to watch. When João pressed the control for the confetti, the sound was wrong, more of a heavy pop than the usual short hiss. A moment later, the platform beneath the chair jolted upward. The pressure canister had ruptured instead of releasing air through the valve. The blast knocked João backward into the stack of gift boxes. The lights flickered as smoke and fragments of shredded paper filled the air. Children closest to the set were pulled aside by parents, and staff shouted for everyone to move back. One technician hit the power switch for the stage lights, while another grabbed a fire extinguisher, unsure of what had failed. The mall's security team arrived within minutes and closed off the area with temporary barriers. Filming stopped immediately. Emergency responders later confirmed that João sustained fatal injuries from the blast and was pronounced dead at the scene. The remaining equipment was disconnected and covered with tarps while authorities inspected the rig. No further announcements were made inside the mall. Shoppers only saw workers removing parts of the stage. That evening, the holiday display was replaced with a plain backdrop and a sign informing visitors that maintenance work was in progress on the seasonal installation. The production company quietly canceled the rest of the scheduled recordings. In the following weeks, the mall continued its Christmas program without stage props, using recorded music and a standard photo area instead. No footage from the earlier sessions was released, and the segment was never mentioned again in the show's schedule. It was December 22, 2013, in Yokohama, Japan. The plaza outside a large shopping mall had been turned into a parade route for the annual winter celebration. Every December, local businesses sponsored a short procession featuring holiday music, dancers, and themed floats meant to draw weekend crowds. The atmosphere was light, with parents holding phones above their heads and children clutching paper flags. A small community TV crew had been invited to film the event for a weekend program about local holiday activities. Their setup included 2 cameras on tripods and a handheld camcorder for close-up shots along the route. One of the performers that afternoon was Kenji Morita, 26, a part-time entertainer hired through an event staffing agency. He had been assigned to wear a reindeer mascot suit and ride the lead float, a small truck platform decorated with imitation snow and metallic ribbons. Kenji had done similar work before at mall promotions and school festivals. His role was to wave, toss soft snowballs to the crowd, and keep the energy light for the camera crew recording nearby. The morning had been busy. Setup crews ran cables for speakers, attached lights, and checked the floats. The truck Kenji stood on had a narrow front section lined with a light aluminum railing covered in tinsel. It wasn't meant for weight-bearing, only decoration. One staff member had noticed that part of the front frame felt loose, but decided it was minor and tied it down with wire instead of rebolting it. The parade started slightly behind schedule after a sound test delayed the first lineup. By early afternoon, the plaza was full. Security volunteers guided the crowd to stay behind rope barriers, while children waved at passing performers. Kenji climbed onto his float, adjusting his heavy mascot head before taking position near the front corner. The costume restricted his vision, and the padded boots made footing unstable. When the signal to start came, the truck moved slowly along the marked path. The community TV crew followed along one side, capturing wide shots and cutaways for later editing. As the float turned near the central fountain, the driver steered gently, but hit a shallow incline that caused the platform to jolt slightly. Kenji, trying to steady himself, reached for the railing. The wire ties snapped from the tension, and the panel shifted forward. His right foot tangled in one of the speaker cables taped along the floor. He stumbled, unable to regain balance, and fell backward from the float onto the pavement behind the moving truck. The nearest camera operator caught the moment. The image wobbled as the lens followed the float, capturing Kenji's fall for less than a second before the operator realized something was wrong and turned away. For a few moments, the parade continued. Some spectators clapped, thinking the stumble was part of the performance, until one of the other mascots shouted toward the driver. The truck came to a stop, and the speakers kept playing the holiday music until a technician cut the sound. Security staff and parade volunteers moved quickly, forming a line to block the view while bystanders stepped back. A few people continued to film, unaware of the seriousness of the situation. Emergency responders arrived from a nearby fire station within minutes. Paramedics began first aid as the crowd was guided toward alternate exits. The remaining floats were directed to a holding area behind the mall, and the event was quietly suspended for the day. Despite immediate treatment, he was pronounced dead shortly after arriving at a nearby hospital. Afterward, the community TV team turned over their footage to mall management and removed the segment from their production schedule. Editors later reviewed the material and confirmed that only a few seconds showed the incident before the camera moved. The clip was stored in the archive, but never aired. The following week, the mall reopened the plaza with the decorations scaled back. The float route was shortened, and future parades were restricted to walking performers. A short local notice mentioned that the previous weekend's festivities had been paused because of an equipment-related accident. No further details were released. The community program aired a short holiday feature as planned, omitting any mention of the parade. It became an event remembered quietly, one that had once been cheerful but was not discussed again. It was July 4th, 2015, in Riverside, Iowa, as extreme heat settled over the town during its annual Independence Day celebration at the community center. By mid-afternoon, temperatures had climbed to 94 degrees, and the outdoor festival was operating at full capacity. Food stands lined the grounds, shade tents were packed, and a raised platform near the pavilion had been set up for the event's most anticipated attraction, a charity hot dog eating contest. A local cable access channel carried the festivities live, using a single fixed camera trained on the platform and the crowd beyond it. The contest had been running for years without incident. Contestants stood shoulder to shoulder behind folding tables, each with trays of hot dogs and buns arranged in front of them. Rules were simple. 10 minutes, eat both bun and sausage, water allowed. No medical staff were positioned at the stage itself, though volunteer responders were stationed elsewhere on the grounds for the holiday crowd. Eleanor Chen, 45, the town's sitting mayor, took her place among the contestants. She had participated before as a way to stay visible at community events, and her presence drew extra attention from spectators. As the countdown ended, the camera captured the contestants leaning forward as the contest began. The first several minutes unfolded routinely. From the wide live shot, viewers saw contestants eating at different paces as the crowd reacted to early leads. Chen ate steadily, keeping her head down, alternating between bites and quick swallows. Sweat was visible on several contestants as the heat intensified. Around the 4th minute, Chen reached for another hot dog and attempted to swallow a large portion without fully chewing. The movement was subtle at first. On camera, she paused mid-motion, her shoulders tensing as she straightened abruptly. She took a step back from the table, one hand rising toward her throat. At first, it appeared she might simply be coughing. Other contestants continued eating. Within seconds, Chen bent forward sharply. The camera captured her knocking into the table as trays slid and hot dogs rolled onto the platform. She dropped to her knees and then collapsed forward, partially out of frame. Spectators closest to the stage reacted immediately. Several people climbed onto the platform as others shouted for help. The live broadcast continued to show the sudden rush of bodies and the confusion around the table before the production cut to a wider crowd shot, and then abruptly away from the feed. Witnesses later stated that Chen was unresponsive when help reached her. Attempts were made to clear her airway, but she had already lost consciousness. Emergency responders arrived from elsewhere on the grounds and initiated resuscitation efforts before transporting her to a nearby hospital. She was pronounced dead shortly after arrival. The medical examiner later determined that Chen died from accidental asphyxiation caused by a complete airway obstruction. The obstruction was consistent with a compacted piece of food lodged deep in the upper airway. Investigators noted that once she collapsed, standard choking interventions were no longer effective. Because the incident occurred during a live broadcast, viewers saw the precise moment the contest unraveled. The sudden pause, the collapse, the rush of people onto the platform, and the abrupt termination of the program. The cable station did not rebroadcast the footage. The contest was permanently discontinued. Event organizers later revised safety planning for public gatherings, requiring closer medical coverage for competitive activities. It was June 18, 2018 in Westfield, Massachusetts, as warm afternoon weather settled over the high school campus ahead of an outdoor graduation ceremony scheduled to begin shortly. Families arrived early, filling the main parking lot and nearby access roads. Folding chairs and blankets were carried toward a roped-off grassy area beside the lot where the stage had been set. Graduates gathered nearby in caps and gowns, forming loose lines as staff finalized seating arrangements. A local cable channel had already begun airing wide shots of the scene, following the flow of arrivals and preparations across the campus. The school's parking lot was built for daily use, not large public events. Temporary barriers and cones had been placed to guide vehicles away from pedestrian areas, but congestion built quickly as drivers searched for spaces. Several cars ended up partially blocking a painted fire lane that ran along the edge of the ceremony area. Rebecca Martinez, 48, the school's principal, had been moving between the parking lot and the stage, coordinating last-minute details with staff. When she noticed her own vehicle angled into the fire lane, she moved to address it before the ceremony began. An assistant offered to handle it, but Martinez chose to move the car herself. Her vehicle was parked tightly between others near the outer edge of the lot. Beyond the fire lane, the asphalt dropped into a grassy drainage slope used to manage runoff after heavy rain. Orange safety fencing marked the boundary between pavement and grass, but it was meant as a visual guide rather than a physical barrier. As preparations continued, cameras remained trained on the ceremony area, capturing families settling into seats and graduates adjusting gowns. In the background of the wide shot, vehicles were still maneuvering through the crowded lot. Martinez entered her car and began backing out carefully. As she turned the wheel to clear the adjacent vehicle, she mistakenly pressed the accelerator instead of the brake. The car surged backward, crossed the fire lane, and struck the temporary fencing. From the ongoing wide shot, sudden movement drew attention near the edge of the frame as the vehicle broke through the barrier and dropped several feet down the grassy embankment beyond the pavement. Several people in the seating area stood up at once, turning toward the lot as shouting spread through the crowd. Graduates nearest the stage froze in place while staff began running toward the slope. The scene remained visible as the atmosphere shifted from anticipation to confusion. Chairs were abandoned, and movement rippled across the field as people tried to understand what had happened just beyond view. Witnesses later said the car descended the embankment at speed before coming to rest at the bottom. Parents and staff reached the vehicle within seconds. Emergency responders who had been assigned to the event arrived quickly and began medical intervention before transporting Martinez to a nearby hospital. She was pronounced dead shortly after arrival. The medical examiner ruled her death accidental, citing catastrophic injuries sustained during the crash. Investigators determined that pedal misapplication, combined with the sloped terrain beyond the parking lot, caused the loss of control. The temporary fencing was found to be incapable of stopping a vehicle. The graduation ceremony was postponed. In the days that followed, the district reviewed traffic flow and safety planning for large events, focusing on vehicle placement and barrier use near pedestrian areas. It was January 15, 2014, in Oklahoma City, as an ice storm crippled infrastructure across the city and forced local television stations to remain live under worsening conditions. By late afternoon, the station's building was running on partial backup power. Overnight freezing rain had caused repeated outages, and engineers had rerouted electricity to keep the newsroom operational. Portable heaters were placed beneath desks to offset the failed HVAC system, and extension strips were added to accommodate increased electrical load. The setup was temporary, rushed, and never intended for sustained live broadcasting. Patricia Rodriguez, 41, had been on air for hours anchoring storm coverage. She remained seated at the main desk as field reports cycled in, updating viewers on road closures and rolling blackouts. The desk housed metal framing beneath its laminate surface, with wiring for lighting, audio interfaces, and monitors bundled together underneath. Earlier in the day, a small number of staff reported faint tingling sensations when touching metal surfaces, but with only a skeleton engineering crew available and storm coverage ongoing, the reports were attributed to static buildup and not escalated. As temperatures hovered around 8 degrees, moisture entered the building from a leaking internal pipe stressed by the cold, seeping into electrical pathways beneath the studio floor. Electrical logs later showed grounding irregularities forming gradually, not suddenly. Voltage fluctuations increased as heaters cycled on and off beneath the desk, drawing power from the same circuit as broadcast equipment. During the live evening segment, Patricia adjusted her posture repeatedly, shifting her arms and briefly rubbing her forearm against the edge of the desk. Viewers noticed her pause once to steady herself, though the broadcast continued uninterrupted. Behind the scenes, technicians later admitted they were monitoring power levels, but believed the system would hold through the hour. At approximately 6:42 p.m., while delivering a weather update, Patricia leaned forward, her left forearm pressing against the desk edge as her foot made contact with the metal base of her chair. In that moment, a surge passed through the compromised circuit. The metal frame beneath the desk had become energized at household voltage, creating a direct contact point. On live television, Patricia visibly stiffened. Her speech stopped mid-word. She attempted to pull back, but instead slumped forward, collapsing against the desk. The camera remained on the wide studio shot as confusion erupted off-screen. The co-anchor stood and moved toward her as the control room scrambled to cut away. Viewers saw the collapse in real time before the feed switched abruptly to pre-recorded programming. The station did not immediately explain the interruption, but emergency services were already en route. Paramedics arrived within 6 minutes and found Patricia unresponsive. Cardiac arrest had already occurred. She was transported to a nearby hospital, where resuscitation efforts failed. The medical examiner later ruled her death accidental, caused by cardiac arrhythmia triggered by electrical shock. Investigators documented contact burns on her forearm and confirmed the desk's metal frame had been energized due to grounding failure, combined with overload from auxiliary heating equipment. Because the collapse occurred on a live broadcast, recordings circulated briefly online before being removed. The footage showed the precise moment Patricia lost motor control, making it one of the rare fatal workplace accidents partially witnessed by a live television audience. The station was shut down for inspection. Regulators cited multiple electrical violations, including improper use of heaters, compromised grounding, and failure to suspend operations despite escalating risk. Patricia Rodriguez's death became a case study in broadcast safety training, demonstrating how layered, ignored hazards can converge on live television, with fatal consequences witnessed in real time. It was March 8, 2016 in Portland, Oregon, as a packed high school gym hosted a state semifinal basketball game broadcast live on a regional cable sports channel. The gymnasium had reached standing room capacity, with spectators lining railings along the upper concourse. The game had drawn unusual attention after the team's unexpected playoff run, prompting a live broadcast using fixed elevated cameras mounted above the court and along the upper seating area. The setup was standard for regional sports coverage, providing wide angles rather than handheld sideline footage. David Williams, 39, was the team's head coach and had remained active throughout the game, pacing the sideline and frequently scanning the upper levels during timeouts. The gym featured a narrow mezzanine walkway behind the upper bleachers, originally designed for lighting access and banner maintenance. Though not intended for routine foot traffic during events, it had become an informal observation point over the years. Months earlier, a routine facilities report had flagged the mezzanine's guardrail anchors as loose due to vibration damage and age-related metal fatigue. Temporary brackets were installed, and permanent repairs were deferred until after basketball season to avoid closing the gym during playoffs. The area was not barricaded that evening. Late in the fourth quarter, the team trailed by 2 points. During a timeout, Williams stepped away from the bench and moved up the stairwell toward the mezzanine, seeking a higher angle to assess defensive spacing. The live broadcast remained focused on the court, but the elevated wide camera captured portions of the upper concourse in the background. As play resumed, Williams leaned forward against the mezzanine railing, resting his forearms on the metal bar while watching the floor below. Structural analysis later showed that one of the temporary brackets had loosened further under repeated vibration from crowd movement. When Williams shifted his weight, the railing anchor failed. On the live feed, viewers saw a sudden movement at the edge of the frame as the railing gave way. Williams disappeared from view, followed by a brief, audible impact off-camera. The broadcast did not show the fall itself, but the reaction on the court was immediate. Players froze, referees stopped play, and spectators nearest the mezzanine began shouting and pointing upward. Arena staff and officials moved quickly to block off the concourse, urging nearby spectators back as others tried to rush toward the mezzanine area. The production team cut quickly to a static wide shot of the court, then to commercial programming. However, the interruption occurred seconds after the incident, and viewers watching live witnessed the exact moment play stopped and the crowd's reaction to an unseen emergency. Emergency medical personnel stationed on site reached Williams within moments, followed by city responders. He was found unresponsive on the concourse level below the mezzanine. Despite rapid medical intervention, he was pronounced dead at the scene. The medical examiner later ruled the death accidental, caused by catastrophic head and internal injuries sustained in the fall. Investigators confirmed the railing failure was due to compromised anchoring and deferred structural repairs. Officials cleared the court as spectators along the upper concourse reacted to an emergency just out of frame, and the feed cut away without immediate explanation. The school district closed the gymnasium immediately and ordered inspections of all elevated walkways across its facilities. Regulators cited deferred maintenance and improper use of temporary structural supports. It was November 12, 2013 in Burlington, Vermont, as a sold-out audience filled a small community theater for the opening night of a production scheduled to be broadcast live on a local public access channel. The theater seated just 150 people, with a fixed camera mounted at the rear of the auditorium to capture a wide view of the stage. The broadcast was simple and unedited, intended to showcase local arts programming rather than provide polished coverage. Above the stage, a counterweight rigging system installed in the early 1980s supported several suspended set pieces, including a heavy canvas backdrop attached to a steel batten pipe. The rigging system had shown signs of wear for years. The backdrop used for the production had a history of drifting off alignment during rehearsals, occasionally requiring manual correction. A full replacement of the system had been discussed but postponed until the following year due to cost. In the meantime, the production moved forward with the existing equipment. Jonathan Mitchell, 52, served as the production's director and technical supervisor. Throughout the evening, he remained in the wings, monitoring scene transitions and the position of the backdrop. During the first half of the performance, the canvas shifted slightly off-center, but did not interrupt the action. The issue became more noticeable as the play approached its final act, where the backdrop framed a key scene. During the brief transition before the last act, Mitchell stepped onto the stage to make a final adjustment. The audience remained seated, and the camera continued rolling on the closed curtain and exposed stage area. Mitchell reached upward, grasping the lower edge of the batten pipe to pull the backdrop back into position. As he applied pressure, the rigging cable supporting the pipe failed at a visibly worn section. The steel batten dropped suddenly, bringing the attached canvas down with it. The falling assembly struck Mitchell across the upper body and shoulders, driving him hard onto the stage floor beneath the weight. From the wide camera angle, viewers saw the backdrop collapse and Mitchell disappear beneath it. The sound of the impact carried through the auditorium as the audience reacted instinctively, some rising from their seats as others froze in place. Actors waiting in the wings rushed forward, and several crew members moved to lift the fallen pipe and canvas. The broadcast continued for several seconds, showing the confusion on stage, before the image cut abruptly to a static slate and then went dark. Emergency services were called immediately. Crew members managed to raise the batten and clear the canvas, but Mitchell was unresponsive. Paramedics arrived within minutes and began treatment on the stage before transporting him to a nearby hospital. He was pronounced dead shortly after arrival. The medical examiner later ruled the death accidental, citing blunt force trauma and cervical injuries caused by impact from a falling rigid object. A subsequent inspection confirmed that the rigging failure originated at a section of cable that had been visibly frayed and under repeated load stress. The theater was closed indefinitely following the incident, and the remainder of the production was canceled. Local inspectors conducted a full review of the facility's overhead systems, identifying multiple safety deficiencies related to aging rigging equipment. It was August 29, 2017, in Gulf Shores, Alabama, as a slow-moving tropical system pushed severe weather onto the coast, while local stations remained live to cover deteriorating conditions. The storm had not yet reached hurricane strength, but sustained winds and frequent lightning had already prompted evacuation orders for beachfront areas earlier that afternoon. Most residents had cleared out, leaving empty hotels, closed shops, and darkened streets along the shoreline. Despite the warnings, one regional news station maintained a live coastal camera position to document the storm's early impact before conditions worsened. Marcus Thompson, 34, was the station's on-air meteorologist and had been assigned to the beach earlier in the day to provide updates on wind speed, surf conditions, and storm movement. He stood near a public access point where dunes offered partial wind cover, while his camera operator positioned equipment several yards away to keep the shot steady against gusts. The broadcast was carried live on the station's primary channel, with a fixed camera trained on Marcus as he delivered updates. Lightning activity had increased steadily throughout the afternoon, with frequent cloud-to-ground strikes occurring offshore and inland. Weather Service alerts warned of elevated lightning risk even outside the main rain bands. As the report continued, Marcus explained that the storm's outer bands were producing unstable electrical conditions well ahead of the system's center. He gestured toward the darkened horizon while waves broke behind him and wind pushed rain across the lens. The camera operator remained just out of frame, monitoring audio levels and power connections. Several minutes into the live segment, a nearby lightning strike hit the sand roughly 50 yards from the camera position. The strike itself was not directly visible on screen, but a bright flash briefly overexposed the image. Almost immediately afterward, Marcus stiffened and collapsed backward onto the sand. The camera remained live as Marcus fell out of frame. Viewers saw the image shake slightly as the operator reacted, followed by shouting off camera. The broadcast cut abruptly to a studio graphic within seconds, leaving viewers with only the sudden disruption and loss of signal from the beach. Emergency services were alerted immediately, but storm conditions delayed access to the area. When responders reached the site, Marcus was unresponsive. He was pronounced dead at the scene. The medical examiner later determined that Marcus had been killed by a lightning-related ground current. Investigators explained that while the bolt did not strike him directly, the electrical energy traveled through the wet sand and entered his body through contact points created by soaked clothing and bare skin. The sudden electrical surge caused immediate cardiac arrest. Review of the live broadcast confirmed that the fatal incident occurred while the camera was rolling. Though the lightning strike itself was not visible, the footage captured the exact moment Marcus collapsed, and the broadcast terminated unexpectedly. The station removed the clip from rebroadcast within hours. In the days that followed, the station suspended all on-location storm reporting from coastal zones. Internal safety reviews concluded that while the storm had not reached hurricane status, lightning conditions alone should have triggered a full pullback. Industry groups later referenced the incident when updating guidelines for live weather coverage, emphasizing that lightning risk often peaks before the most dramatic storm visuals arrive. Thanks for watching. Want to watch more? Click on your screen now.